In today's episode of the QPAT podcast, we'll be showing a recent seminar presented by Starling Minds entitled Hormones and Health, Supporting Yourself Through Life's Changes. Starling Minds always focuses on stress management, physical and mental well-being. However, this seminar did a deeper dive into the role that hormones play in women's lives and how it affects the different stages. For more information on Starling Minds, which is a digital online platform which is free of charge for all QPAT members and their families, please visit starlingminds.com. Enjoy today's episode.
So without further ado, thank you all for being here. Thank you for joining us. For those who don't know me, my name is Tara Ashkar. I'm the mindfulness advisor at Starling Minds. I host a variety of workshops and webinars for all of you. And I'm very excited to be here with Dr. Paula De Chico, who is a naturopathic doctor, and I've had the pleasure to really learn from her in the past few months as we were creating this workshop. Paula has over 20 years of experience helping women, regulating their cycles, understanding the imbalances from the root all the way to the surface, and really understanding how to support women throughout their overall health and life cycles. Paula, do you want to add on anything?
Well, I just wanted to say good evening to everyone, and it's really an honor to be here with all of you tonight. I wish I could see your faces, but I see all of the comments popping up in the chat, which is really wonderful to see. And as Tara and I have spoken over these weeks and months, we're both so excited to be here because of how important this information is, and for all of us to really understand our hormones and what's going on from the inside out as much as possible. So we are here to give you the best that we can, answer your questions, and share the best of our knowledge with all of you. So thank you.
And we recognize that, perhaps the majority of people here are women, but also there might be men and non-binary people. And really, this workshop is here to support women's health, but also to understand if you have women in your life, which probably we all do, how to support them and how to help them and understand them better. So the main goal that we have here is to empower you to take charge of your own health, to understand what happens within your cycle, to really raise your self-awareness. And because really knowledge is power. And by knowing that, we'll be exploring our cycles as women, we'll be understanding our hormones, we'll be looking at strategies based on nutrition, on exercise, stress and cortisol level, looking at toxins in our life and how all of these impact us and how we can make small yet very impactful changes that can support us in our daily lives. So session 1, today's session, we'll be exploring the hormonal dance, the fluctuations of the different hormones in our bodies and our minds, and how that impacts us, in the different stages of our lives. Then we'll explore as well how nutrition and how exercise can be our allies in the different phases. Next week, we'll dive into cortisol, stress reduction management, and also we'll understand more how some lifestyle practices can support us. So before we start with our session, I want to ask you all the first question related to our checkup. This is something that we ask in mostly all of our sessions. And the checkup, for those who are unaware, is a series of questions related to our stress, our energy, our anxiety, our depression, our resilience, to better understand where we're at in the mental health continuum. And it's really only when we understand where we're at that we can give ourselves the right tools and strategies. So self-awareness in really any area of our life is key to better understand how to support ourselves. So I'll give you all maybe another 10-15 seconds to answer this poll, and then we'll move on with our session today. And just a reminder that all the poll questions are fully anonymous, so the invitation is to answer candidly. There is no right or wrong answer here. It's really about creating this collaboration and bringing more knowledge to you based on your answers. All right, so I'm going to end the poll and share the results. So it looks like the majority of people have not done the Starling Minds checkup. The invitation and part of the home practice that at the end of today's session is to do the checkup. And I'll show you where that is in the Starling Minds program. We see that 40% have done the checkup. That is great. And 5% are unsure. So again, we will be sharing with you where that is in the program at the end of our session. So let's continue with our session. We'll start by really looking at the hormonal dance, and Paula will explain that a bit further, more in details in a moment. But what I just want to say here is, it might be obvious for many of us, but women are not small men. We have different systems, different hormonal fluctuations in our body. Our hormones are more complex than men's, and it's not good or bad, it's just different. And the reason why I say that we're not small men is because we have different needs, different nutrition needs, different rest needs, different physical exercise needs, and we need to tend to our needs so that we can find this hormonal dance in a more easeful way. So we'll dive into that, but before doing that, I want to ask another poll here. And in this poll, you'll find 4 questions related to your energy, mood, and cravings. How you experience stress in the body. How do you respond to your hormonal symptoms? And how comfortable are you discussing your hormonal health with others? So make sure to answer all 4 questions before submitting your answers. And I really like the 4th question because it speaks about the stigma that is quite present when it comes to women's hormonal health. We often shy away from expressing how we feel, or we toughen it up because we don't want to be quote unquote too hormonal. But it's way more deeper than that. We often dismiss that. All right, I see a lot of answers coming in. So I will end the poll, share the results. So when it comes to shifts in energy, moods, and cravings, 57% see them occasionally and notice them, but don't necessarily track them. So there is that self-awareness, which is great. 36% regularly sees it. And we see that really it's only 8% that rarely pay attention or never pay attention. So we're already aware. We are a group of aware people here, which is really great. And it's really with this awareness that we can enhance and fine-tune our strategies. When you experience stress, how does it feel in your body? How does your body typically react? We can see that the majority, 76%, find sleep disturbances and fatigue to be prominent, increase in anxiety and mood swings, a change in appetite. Some say other, and if it's other, feel free to write it in the chat. I'm curious to know what it might be for you. How do you respond to the hormonal symptoms? 50% recognize them, but don't always know what to do. And hopefully by the end of these 2 sessions, you'll have a better understanding of how you can support yourself. 31% tend to push through without addressing them. This is often quite common, especially, often women have so many different responsibilities for working and then caring for family and for themselves. So we wear a lot of hats. 13% have to say they have go-to strategies that help them manage stress and manage these symptoms. So again, if you feel like sharing one that's really been working for you, feel free to add it in the chat for others to benefit from it. And then how comfortable do you feel discussing this? And I'm really pleasantly surprised at seeing that 43% say very comfortable. 30 say somewhat, 16 say a little. For those who are very comfortable, I encourage you to speak more about it so that the people that are less comfortable can feel empowered to also speak up. Beautiful. Okay, thank you everyone for sharing your thoughts and results, and we'll move on with the presentation.
All right, so I'm going to take over from where Tara left off in the sense of where knowledge is power. So what is really striking to me in all of these years of practice in working with so many women in the 35 to 65-year-old age group is how few of them actually know what is going on in this monthly hormonal dance that we live with for many, many years. And so if knowledge is power, then we need to understand this hormonal dance a little bit deeper so that we can start making those connections and we can start understanding what we're tracking and what we're experiencing, and then actually associating it to, wait a second, what's supposed to be going on in my body hormonally? And if I'm having these symptoms, then maybe what is going on, and they might not be the same thing. So let's start off by looking at a hormonal cycle. First of all, where does it even start? So for those of you who aren't sure, day 1 is what we call your first day of bleeding. And your cycle will be all of the days right up until the day before your next first day of bleeding. So for example, if your first day of bleeding is June 1st, and then your next day of bleeding is July 1st, well, that menstrual cycle is from June 1st to June 30th. And so as you see in the chart here, you've got the first few days that are basically not very eventful hormonally, other than your bleeding. So that's the shedding of the internal lining because a conception has not happened. And so all the work that your hormones did month long isn't needed anymore. So we shed that, and those are the bleeding days. Within about a few days of bleeding, the hormonal dance starts to pick up again. And so I'm going to draw your attention to the pink line, which is the estrogen. So once you get to about day 5 or 6, which for most women is the petering end of the bleed, then you've got estrogen that starts coming in. And the way I invite women to think of estrogen is a little bit like it's got that very productive yang sun type of energy. Your estrogen wants to make things happen. So what your estrogen is doing is that it's stimulating the development of the follicle, the egg, inside the ovary. So there are a lot of them that are in there, and they're all kind of trying to figure out who's going to be the toughest or the strongest one. And that is going on in your follicular phase. The names of the phases kind of give away what's happening. It's the development of the follicle, and that's mainly driven by estrogen. So that's going on, and you see by the pictures there that this egg is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And then textbook-wise, by about day 12, 13, 14, that magic, that work of the estrogen is pretty much done. And now you get this big surge that we call the LH surge, and we'll break down these hormones a little bit more in a sec. And that LH surge basically tells the estrogen, hey, your job is done. Let that egg go, and then you can go to sleep. And that's ovulation. So then from your ovary, the dominant egg, the follicle that wins, is released from the egg, travels down the fallopian tube, and then boop, is just sitting there in the uterus. And now it's ready to be fertilized if that is what happens. So once that first part of your menstrual cycle is done, the midline is ovulation. Now the estrogen has kind of gone down and it's, having a chill moment. And while it's doing that, your progesterone takes off. So it's all in the word. Progesterone, progestation. Gestation is carrying the fetus, right? So that is the time in your cycle where your body is saying, okay, I got to get this ready for the fertilization. So I've got to build and nurture. So the progesterone is very yin, it's very moonlight, it's very calming, it's very nourishing and tonifying. So the uterus is getting ready, the rest of the body is getting ready. And so you've got the progesterone mounting during that luteal phase. And then, so that's the green line that you're following. Then by about day 23 or 25 of your cycle, if that fertilization, egg meets sperm, has not happened, then the show's over. The progesterone says, oh, this isn't happening this month. Okay, we can stop all of this activity and getting the uterus ready because it's not what's going to happen right now. And so then, as you see in the green line, the progesterone comes down. And once the estrogen and the progesterone are low enough around day 26, 27, 28, maybe up to day 32, then the loss of those hormones is what stimulates the body to release it all. And then we start another menstrual cycle with the start of the bleed. So you see that estrogen and progesterone are very complementary, that yin yang kind of approach. The estrogen builds, the progesterone feeds and nourishes. And both of those hormones are secreted by our ovaries, and they're told to do that by a brain center. Up here in your brain, you kind of have, I call them like the parents. So these guys up here in your hypothalamus and your anterior pituitary gland, they're little zones in your brain. They're producing the instruction hormones. And those instruction hormones will go to your different glands to tell your glands to make certain hormones. So today we're really focusing on estrogen, progesterone, and the ovaries, but that same master seat is going to dictate what goes on with your thyroid, with your cortisol being your stress hormone, your insulin being your blood sugar regulator, etc. So that's the explanation that you've got down here. When that brain center starts producing lots of FSH, that travels down to your ovaries to say, okay, time to make that estrogen. When it's the LH that is being secreted by this top seed over here, that information goes down to the ovary to tell the ovary, all right, you got to make progesterone. There are slight details, but if you are working with your healthcare provider who's going to be doing blood tests, you're going to see these four pop up in your blood test: FSH, LH, estradiol, and progesterone. And then you understand just by looking at this chart now that, wait a second, it's going to depend where I'm at in my cycle. And very often that piece is missing from the conversation with a conventional healthcare provider. A lot of the times women aren't told at what time in their cycle to go for their blood test, because depending on what you want to understand or figure out, you've got to send women at their particular time in their cycle. And then when you get your blood test results, which I recommend you all do, it is your property. It's part of taking that ownership on your own health and being your own health champion and advocate. You're going to see in the blood test results that there's no normal range. It's not like, oh, this is okay if it's between 0 and 10. It's broken down depending on where you are in your menstrual cycle. So whenever you're going for blood tests for your hormones, it'll depend when the right time is to go. But remember and say, oh yeah, I'm in my follicular phase, or I'm at ovulation, or I'm in my luteal phase. And then all of that information is in that note form on the slide for you.
Thank you, Paula. If I can add one quick thing here, the way I see these four phases and try to understand them for my own self when it comes to, I look at them as seasons of the year, where menstruation is more of the winter season, where I need more rest, I'm more tired, I feel more sensitive. Like you said, the hormones are at the lowest. Then the follicular phase with the estrogen going up is the spring. I feel a bit more energetic, a bit more social. I feel a bit more magnetic. And then with the peak of the hormones, ovulation is when I feel like I can conquer the world and my confidence is up. And yeah, things are feeling really good in my body and my mood is much more positive. And then slowly in the luteal phase comes autumn or fall. This is where I feel, again, I slowly come back down and slowly feel more introverted until I reach, where the drop of all the hormones are down, and then this is where the sensitivity is a bit more present and the cycle repeats. So that's kind of like how I try to see in which phase am I, and like really trying to understand and learn more about my body as well.
And I think that's great because just like the seasons, depending on where you're living, I'm in Montreal, the seasons, we behave differently from our sleep needs, our activity levels, the food that we eat, the types of activities that we do, the clothes that we wear, and then of course, our physical energy, our spirit and our mental energy is all going to change with that. So I really like that analogy.
Thank you.
All right. So my hat goes off to Tara when I saw this slide, which is her creation. I absolutely loved it. And I feel like it just says so much about the hormonal dance, if we want to call it that, hormonal challenge that so many of us go through. So it's broken down into three, right? So premenopausal is basically your fertility years. So that's basically from when you get your period until, depending on the woman, anywhere from your early 30s to your mid 40s. And we're going to go through each of these sections. But look at that difference, right? So the premenopause phase, basically you're seeing with every spike, that's ovulation. So it's a condensed 5 months of what your body goes through on a monthly basis 5 times. So lots of up and down, but intended to be pretty predictable at, composer's type of cadence. And then look at what happens. Then it's like, oh, I don't know, all of that goes out the window. Now we've got, sometimes it's up, sometimes it's down. We're not really sure what's happening. So perimenopause is really the not sure. It's going to kind of just be all over the place for many of us. And then you see the hormones just tank out. And so you see, we're not talking about the dotted lines, we're talking about the solid lines in postmenopause. That's when your ovaries, like we said, those are the producers of estrogen and progesterone, they go to sleep. And so then we see those really bottom out. So, I mean, we're looking at a graph right here that will take a woman from about 12 years old to about 65 years old. And that is an incredible, incredible journey. So I love to see them one next to each other. That was great. So that's a bit of a visual. So what I've done here is so much of the talk around estrogen, progesterone is around ovaries, uterus, and breasts. And what we don't include enough in the conversation is that every single body system from head to toe and from toe to head is affected by estrogen and progesterone. So we call them sex hormones because, for obvious reasons, in terms of where they're located and what they're involved in. But what we need to remember is that narrow vision is a little too narrow, and we could be missing a lot of what we call systemic effects, impacts on the rest of your system from these hormones. So estrogen and progesterone have an impact on all of these body systems: your respiratory system, your cardiovascular system, your cognitive system, your skin, how you digest your food, how your immune system works, that gut microbiome, what's going on in your vagina. That is all going to be impacted by estrogen and progesterone. And so that to me was really important to bring home. So that's what we wanted to share there. So if we go through a little bit more that fun longevity type of hormonal curve that we saw, we're going to break it up into those 3 sections and just kind of go through some of those definitions. So like we said, what's called menstrual years, your fertility years, your premenopausal years are where we spend a lot of our time. The average age of a girl or young woman of getting her period is now at around 9 years old and is just sort of ever getting lower and lower. We're going to have a really big segment, Tara, is it in the second, I think it's in the second lecture, where we talk about environmental toxin effects and how basically our hormones are under attack and assault and siege by endocrine hormone disruptors in our environment. And a lot of that is driving girls younger and younger to getting their periods. And then women will have pretty regular periods until anywhere from about 30 to 45 years old. And that again is getting younger and younger. So we put it at a 9 to 40 year range. And that's where we have that up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down that's happening every month. So we've got those cyclical, you can time it by your watch, changes in estrogen and progesterone. And a lot of that has to do with fertility and having the uterus ready for all of that activity. Now, the challenges that can happen for all of these years include premenstrual symptoms, and we're going to go into a lot of depth there because we're going to see some incredible statistics about how many PMS symptoms there potentially are and how many women deal with them. And that's something else that I find really fascinating. I will ask my patients, all right, so what's going on PMS wise? And almost every single woman will only mention mental emotional changes. And I think this is a little bit what Tara was talking about in the beginning. It's almost like a social conditioning that women are hormonal. And so this is your hormonal time. And so if you're more weepy or more anxious or more irritable, then that's what we peg socially as, oh, it's just PMS. And so we're going to get into a lot of that, but there are a lot of other symptoms. And then when I start listing them, do your breasts hurt? Do you get a headache? Do you get pimples, usually around this zone here? Oh yeah, I get that. Oh yeah, I do that. Oh yeah, that happens. And so to have that moment to be able to connect those dots for women and say, well, that's part of PMS as well. And then they get to have that light bulb moment. So that's really important. Unfortunately, a lot of women suffer from very painful periods, some even to the point of endometriosis, which is a very complex health condition that is very challenging for many women. For some women, that cramping pain can even start days before or during the bleed, and it can be really quite uncomfortable. We can have irregular menstrual cycles. So the textbook length of a menstrual cycle is 28 to 32 days. I'm okay with 27 to 33 days. And then anything that's shorter than that, longer than that, or irregular from month to month, in my professional opinion, is about looking at what's going on in their hormonal dance, amongst other things. Another interesting question I ask women, I get extremely graphic in my appointments. We're here to unpack and unpeel. We all go through this. So I want to know how much they're bleeding. So I will be asking, are you using a menstrual cup, tampons, pads, super tampon, regular pad? What are you using and how fast do you have to change? Because if I just ask you, are your periods heavy? You might say no, because your normal might be that you're in the bathroom changing a super pad and tampon because they're saturated every 2 hours. And then I'm going to come in and say, oh, wow, that's really quite a heavy flow. But you don't know that because that's been your normal. So really important to not just ask questions assuming that everyone's on the same page. You want to get into the details. Are you clotting? Are you hemorrhaging? Are you, I've got some women who it's like, I'm not going out day 1 and day 2 of my period because I don't know what's going to happen when I get up from my chair. So these are the conversations that are really important that contribute to the demystifying and putting everyone on the same page that Tara talked about at the beginning. Go back. All right. We just mentioned the birth control pill here. I believe that that's a lecture all within itself. Women do not have a lot of choices when it comes to their contraceptive power and choices. That being said, the vast majority of choices are hormonal influencers that women don't necessarily get the full description of what's happening and possible effects, ranging from IBS to social anxiety to vaginitis to aches and pains. So it can be a lot more complex than just take the pill and everything will be fine. A lot of women, more and more so, are going through fertility concerns for a number of reasons, largely driven by what's going on in our environment. And then, of course, there's the mental health challenges that go with these fluctuating hormones that Starling Minds, I think, is a really fantastic platform to help support, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. All right, now I'm ready. Okay, so as we mentioned with regards to PMS, so we've got 150 symptoms, and they can be psychological, they could be digestive, hormonal, skin, swelling, pimples, brain fog, aches and pains, you name it. And about 80% of women will have some kind of premenstrual syndrome symptom, to the point of where half of us are actually seeking advice from their healthcare providers. Now, here's a challenge. Your conventional medical doc, for whom I have a huge amount of respect, has one tool in their toolkit to help you with any kind of hormonal imbalance. And that one tool is the birth control pill or a hormonal IUD. And that may be the best choice and the right choice for you, but know that that is hormonal suppression and not hormonal balancing. And again, everything has its time and place. And so it's not about guilt or that's not the right thing to do. It's about you being informed in what you're consenting to, and know that there are other ways of going about it where we can actually analyze hormones. We can do it in a blood test at a snapshot. Let's say you have crazy PMS. You're going to want to get those bloods done day 18 to 21 of your cycle. Let's say we're seeing you're tracking and we're seeing all kinds of symptoms popping up at ovulation at different times. Well, I'll do a urine test with patients where they collect their urine every 2 to 3 days for an entire cycle. We send that off to the lab, and then we get to see a whole month cycle like we saw in our chart before. How does theirs compare? And we overlay them. So at the different segments of your cycle, what's happening? Is estrogen too low? Is progesterone too high? Are they both too low, or what have you? And then we can work on those. All right, next, we're going to go into the perimenopause side. Oh, this is really fun. So perimenopause is a really fascinating time. That's in that chart where you saw things just get really erratic. So the textbook definition of perimenopause is that it can start up to 10 years before you actually go into menopause, which is no more period. And for the months and years leading up to menopause, you're in this wonky time. And you can have shorter cycles, longer cycles, heavier bleeding, shorter bleeding. You can have symptoms all over the map. It's a very roller coaster kind of time. And although the average age is now in the early 40s, textbook wise, we're actually seeing women in their late 20s starting to show hormonal changes of perimenopause. So just because you don't fit the medical textbook definition from 10, 20, 30 years ago, that doesn't mean that this may not be happening to you too early, and that there are solutions and supports. Okay. Challenges that happen during this phase. So most of the challenges come up because it's a time in your hormonal life where your progesterone tends to be dipping and your estrogen is all erratic. And so that leaves you in a place that we call estrogen dominance. It's not that you're making too much estrogen. It's that it is dominating over the role of progesterone. So I saw a quick chat come up, a comment in the chat saying inflammation with a few exclamation marks. Exactly. So when you're in estrogen dominance, you can be in a very inflammatory state. And then at the same time, if you don't have enough progesterone, that can really be hurting you, because that progesterone is that nourishing, tonifying energy. So the perimenopausal years are usually indicated, hallmarked with irregular periods. You know, oh, I don't have a period, it's 3 months. Okay, now I'm getting a period every 2 weeks, and erratic like that. Changes in blood flow. A lot of women will go through very heavy bleeding during these years. Then we've got the really fun hot flashes and night sweat. The moods can really be all over the place. Generally, mental health is a strong suit. You feel balanced, nothing major. And then all of a sudden you are so deep and in the dark, or crazy anxiety. And you're like, I don't know what has changed. There's no event that seems to have kicked this off. The sleep disturbances, the brain fog, the short-term memory, We've got weight changes. Usually it'll be around the midsection. So you don't change anything. You're eating the same way, you're exercising the same amount, but it's not working. It might be hormonal. We've got changes in libido and vaginal dryness. That's always fun. That can increase our chances of urinary tract infections. So what happens in the genital, vaginal, urinary area is so important, and a lot of it's dictated by hormones. And yes, we are a little bit more sensitive, and we'll talk about the cortisol dance and how that's involved in these hormones as well.
Thank you, Paula. I think another thing that is interesting to note during the menstrual phase and in perimenopause as well is an indication of how out of balance we are by the severity of our symptoms. The more severe our symptoms are, the more there is something that is out of balance, and the more we can, yeah, explore what's happening. That's a great way of our bodies telling us that's okay, there's something that is really out of alignment right now.
And I think a lot of the research around the effectiveness of a mindfulness meditation practice in managing perimenopause and menopausal symptoms very much speaks to that. And I think a lot of our cortisol struggles, like you mentioned earlier, Tara, the reality of the modern woman, of wearing so many hats and having full-time jobs or working outside of the home and inside of the home, sandwich generation, caring for the parents as well, that will really have an impact on these moments of hormonal change.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on. Just being mindful of the time that we
Yes.
have.
Yes. So in terms of some specific symptoms, they're listed here. They're ones that we've talked about. So kind of dividing them a little bit into, is this an estrogen thing? Is this a progesterone thing? Often it's both, but that's there for your reference.
And then menopause.
Menopause is where you have had 12 consecutive months of absolutely no bleeding. Then you can say that you're in menopause. The average age is 51 and a half, but it can start many years before that, and for some women after that. And that's when the ovaries have shut down and gone to sleep. And so we've got very low estrogen and progesterone levels. And this is where we see the impacts on the rest of our systems, our stress systems, our environmental toxin exposures, and how we deal with these transitions, like you said, Tara. So a lot of the challenges during menopause are very similar to perimenopause, right? So we've got the hot flashes, the night sweats, the moods, the vaginal dryness, the weight gain, the brain fog. So they're all very similar because those are the hormones changing. In menopause, one last thing, sorry, just to highlight, is the bone density becomes really relevant, and cardiovascular health. There's a real uptick in heart attacks with women once they're in menopause.
And this is where food and exercise can really come in and support.
Yep.
And before we dive into food and exercise, we're going to run another poll. And thank you, Paula, for this amazing information you just shared. The chat is very lively. And so in this poll, there are two questions. The first one is, which phase of your life are you currently in? Menstrual years, perimenopause, menopause, unsure, or perhaps this question is not applicable for you. And if applicable, what are the most common symptoms you're currently experiencing? And it can be more than one. You can choose as many as feel relevant for you. And really, this is to understand the group as a whole better, and also to normalize the symptoms that we all feel them in some way, shape, or form at some stage in our life. Beautiful. We'll give it another maybe 10, 15 seconds. All right. Thank you everyone for sharing your results. Um, so it looks like the majority, it's pretty much of a tie, but the majority of women in this group are either in their perimenopausal phase or menopausal phase. 8% are not sure, and 14% are in their menstrual cycle. And if applicable, which are the most common symptoms? We can see that mood swings, irritability, anxiety, depression is quite high, 59% sleep disturbances, brain fog, memory issues, weight gain, metabolism shifts. Yeah, the low libido, vaginal dryness, increase in sensitivity and stress. So there's a range of symptoms that we all feel. And yeah, like Paula was saying, it's important to understand the different phases and the symptoms that may occur in each phase, and perhaps bring a sense of comfort that these are things that we can all feel and face, and there are solutions for that. And so, looking at the solutions, we'll be exploring, first of all, nutrition and really the power of nutrition. Women's nutritional needs change throughout the different stages of our lives, from menstruation to pregnancy, to perimenopause, to menopause and aging. And a well-balanced diet can help us support our hormonal balancing, can help us support with our energy levels, our mental clarity, our sleep, just our overall well-being. Unfortunately, the Western diet, also called sometimes the SAD diet, standard American diet, is high in processed, ultra-processed foods. It's high in sugar and is high in unhealthy fats, which leads to inflammation in the body, which leads to different types of hormonal imbalances and chronic health issues. Somewhat of a Mediterranean diet or a real food, whole food diet can really help us with hormonal health, with gut health, with heart health, with mood regulation. So it doesn't need to be complicated. We don't need to count how much we eat, because we often don't have the time to do that. But thinking about eating a variety of vegetables. If you can't, eating cooked vegetables is much better for the body as well, because it's easier to digest. Eating healthy proteins, eating good sources of fats, vegetables that are starchy, and legumes and healthy fats, and just trying to increase the amount of legumes, decrease the amount of sugar, increase the amount of protein, because often women have not enough protein, and healthy fats. And that's really what we can do to support ourselves. So proteins, I dedicated a slide specifically to proteins, and we decided, actually, Paula and I, to dedicate a slide specifically to proteins, because often women don't eat enough proteins, and it's essential for women's health so that we support our hormonal production, to eat enough proteins, to eat proteins at each meal of the day, for our hormones, for our muscles, for our bones, for our mood, for our tissue repairs, for our energy. Hormones are essential. And it can be animal sourced proteins, it can be vegetarian sources or vegan sources of protein like tofu, tempeh, ideally buying them organic and non-GMO. It can be protein powder if this is something that you like. It can be also cheese. So different sorts of protein, but making sure to have protein in every meal. Another dedicated slide that we decided to have is on fats, healthy fats. There was a lot of bad rep on fats, that fats will make you fat. That's not really true. Often it's sugar that makes us fat, and healthy fats are very different than unhealthy fats. So when we're talking about healthy fats, we're talking about salmon and avocado and nuts and seeds and olive oil. All of these fats will support hormonal balancing. And as women, we need that in our daily diet. We need it for nutrition absorption. We need it for brain functioning. We need it for inflammation as well, and to really create a better mood, a better metabolism. Crucifers, and this is a great one that actually Paula brought to my attention, that often as women we think, okay, well, I'm eating healthy, I'm eating a salad, so that's great, that's healthy. But in the salad, there's often perhaps just tomatoes, lettuce, cucumbers, and maybe another vegetable. And it doesn't really include crucifers, which are very high in fiber, which are really good for hormonal detoxification and gut health. So things like broccoli and kale and cauliflower and chard and cabbage and spinach, all of these should be included in abundance, as much as you can, as much as you want into your diet. So let's look at how to eat, or what to focus on perhaps a bit more during the different stages of a woman's life. When it comes to menstruation, obviously during menstruation we're bleeding, so we're losing a lot of iron. So having iron-rich foods is going to be really beneficial for us in this stage of our life. Iron-rich foods such as spinach and lentils and red meat and quinoa to help really prevent this iron deficiency. You're going to see protein in every single stage of the woman's life because, again, we spoke about protein and all of its benefits. Omega-3s are really important. And in fact, I believe I saw a statistic saying that around 60% of women are deficient in omega-3 and around 70% are deficient in magnesium. Omega-3 will help you with the reduction of inflammation, support of hormonal regulation, your brain and cognitive health as well. So salmon, walnuts, flax seeds. I personally don't eat fish. It's something that I have a hard time to digest, so I take an omega-3 supplement every single day, and it's been really helpful for me. Magnesium is another really good and important mineral that we forget. It helps ease the pain of cramps and promotes relaxation. You can find it in dark chocolate, in almonds, in bananas. It also helps with anxiety and calms the nervous system. Perimenopause. So as Paula mentioned, this is where our hormones are fluctuating. They're a bit erratic, they're irregular. So the goal during this phase is to support hormonal balancing, to stabilize blood sugar levels, and to reduce inflammation in the body. So think about complex carbs to stabilize energy and mood. Things like quinoa, oats, sweet potatoes. Think about healthy fats, avocados and oils, and coconut perhaps to support your hormonal production. Proteins, again, super important. Support the metabolism, support our muscles, support our brain health, our hormones. Crucifers, vegetables to create and support the liver detox. And phytoestrogens like tofu and tempeh for a gentle, balanced hormonal, a hormonal balancing act essentially. And then in menopause, as Paula mentioned, this is when our bone density is impacted, when women are perhaps more prone to osteoporosis, where heart health is more impacted. So the goal perhaps is to preserve bone and muscle mass, to manage metabolism changes, to protect long-term health. Calcium and vitamin D will be really important here to support bone health. Sardines, leafy greens, fortified plant milks are really a great source and addition of food. Lean proteins as well, proteins, always proteins. Phytoestrogen to help with the hormonal balancing for women. Some heart health foods as well. So heart health foods are healthy fats as well, olive oil, fatty fish, omega-3s, and a lot of antioxidant fruits and vegetables to combat aging and the oxidative stress and process that is naturally occurring. Now, I added this slide kind of last minute to really look at the 5 nutrition mistakes that as women we often face or do without knowingly or unconsciously. The first one, not eating enough protein. Protein, like we said, is essential for our overall health. And when we undereat protein, we get all of these imbalances. We feel more hungry, we feel more irritated, we feel a hormonal shift. So typically you want to have proteins in every single meal. And I believe, Paula, you mentioned around 20 to 30 grams in every single meal, especially if you're exercising.
Most definitely, I'm seeing a lot of comments and chats around sleep. And I find that that's one of the biggest pieces is, like Tara said, you need to calculate your protein to get an idea of if you're actually having enough, because most women don't. So 20 to 30 grams of protein 3 times a day. And some women push the intermittent fasting because that's all the craze and influencers, but that may actually be working against you. And that's a whole lecture in itself on the insulin cortisol relationship. But take home message, start off by ensuring 20 to 30 grams of protein 3 times a day, and maybe even trying to get that first one in by 9:30 in the morning.
Thank you, Paula. Which brings me to the second mistake, skipping meals or under eating. Eating too little slows down our metabolism, especially when we're skipping meals in the morning. That can have a negative impact on our hormones. When we wake up as women, our cortisol or stress hormone is high. So if we don't eat and we push the window of eating further away because we're trying to intermittent fast, what we're telling our body is that we're not safe, that there is stress, and we're going to feel that sense of anxiety. If we give our bodies food first thing in the morning, it's a signal to the body that we are safe. So inviting in food in the morning, and like Paula said, inviting in probably protein in the morning can be a game changer. This is something that I've actually started applying in my life after you shared it with me, Paula, and it's been such a big difference in my nervous system. I feel way more calmer throughout the day. Avoiding healthy fats, as we spoke about proteins and fats, including more fats in your diet, not shying away from healthy fats. Relying on processed and sugary foods, this can create inflammation and cause weight gain. And finally, drinking coffee on an empty stomach. Coffee on an empty stomach can create jitters, can create and raise our cortisol level, blood sugar, increase our stomach acid, and that can impact us and impact our stress levels, our cortisol levels. We'll speak about that a bit more in next session, how cortisol and stress impacts us differently than men as well. So perhaps if you're taking coffee in the morning, maybe eat something before, or perhaps put some butter or some ghee in your coffee so that it can stabilize that cortisol. I think I'm going to skip this question and go straight into the exercises just because of time here. And I'll pass it on to Paula.
Great. So the next few slides are about exercise. You're going to have the slide deck to refer to. So I think we really want to leave time for questions. So we'll kind of go through that. So as we said, for everything, men and women are different. And so what we need to understand is that women have different needs to exercise depending on where they are in their hormonal reality and where they are at this time in their cycle as well. And so we're going to look at what would be the best type of exercise depending on where you are in your hormonal life and then where you are in your hormonal cycle. So let's have a look. All right, so when we are in our menstrual years, right? So again, the analogy of the 4 seasons, when it's bleed time, it's winter, low energy levels, there's a lot of rest, there's more yin type of yoga, there's stretching, there's breathing, there's time in nature, there's walking, and that's sort of the focus for those days. Then when your estrogen starts to pick up, which again is that analogy of yang, of sun, then it's like, all right, I'm going to hit it. And so that's where you're doing more of your cardio, or you're doing your big heavy weightlifting, your high intense training. And then you're peaking at that with ovulation, your libido goes with that. So it's a big sort of go type of energy. Then that all starts to kind of peter down. So maybe for the first few days, even week after ovulation, you might still be feeling some of that energy, but it's maybe time to start dialing it down. Maybe we're doing some vinyasa yoga, maybe there's some swimming. And then when you're in those days up to a week before your period, you're revving it down. So again, you're doing that time in nature, those lovely walks, that lighter yoga. So that's kind of giving us an idea during that time. When we're in our 30s, so we're going to talk about, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s and beyond, we kind of need different types of exercise. So when we're in our 20s and 30s, we're getting a nice wide variety, but we see that there's a higher focus on cardio, right? So we're walking, jogging, cycling, what have you, but it's all evened out also with resistance training, stretching, and breathing. Once we start going more into perimenopause, then we see that the cardio starts turning down the volume a little bit more emphasis on strength training. That core becomes really important so that we get our metabolism clipping at a good pace, working on the pelvic floor, because those hormonal changes can come with, some urinary incontinence or what have you. And, the deep breathing goes with all of the stages. And then once we're a little further along, where we're in menopause, postmenopause, then we really want to be putting a big emphasis on strength training. I'm just going to kind of drop this in there because there are a lot of questions and comments about osteopenia and osteoporosis. So there are really fantastic evidence-based strength training exercises where you are working up to lifting incredibly high weights as a way to actually reverse loss of bone density. So, and we're not talking about, a little weight here or there. We're working with our trainers and we're really loading on that resistance. And this is a time in our lives where we really need to focus on maintaining our muscle mass because that is going to have a preventative effect on falling. And we don't want to be falling and breaking those bones because that's a whole sort of chain of events there. And we want to be working on that flexibility. Tai Chi is beautiful for that. Of course, yoga, Pilates, what have you.
Thank you, Paula. I saw a bunch of comments saying that they're trying to take in the information, but the slides are moving. This is recorded and you will have access to the recording, so you'll be able to pause to take in the information. Also, we will be sharing a PDF at the end of session 2 with some of the insights that we're sharing during these sessions, so you'll have a PDF that you can print out. So before we go into questions, I want to quickly show you all what the homework is and where you can find the homework. So essentially the homework, we encourage you to take an initial checkup of Starling Minds so that you can understand again your awareness around your stress, your anxiety, your depression, your resilience, and learn how to check in with yourself and what shifts are happening so you can support yourself. Choose one nutritional shift that you can support yourself. And it can be perhaps eating more protein or eating in the morning in the window of 30 to 45 minutes when you wake up. Something simple that is manageable for you. It can be perhaps having some coconut oil in your coffee to avoid this cortisol spike.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever it is, something that you can do and that is manageable for you. Choose one movement practice. It can be simple as well. Instead of taking the elevator, perhaps taking the stairs. Trying some resistant training with bands if you don't want to go to the gym. What's one thing that you can do that your future self will thank you for? And finally, share your reflections and your intentions with the community in the Starling Minds program. And I will show you where you can find all of this. Because really the comments that have been coming up are so amazing, and there's a lot of, I can feel a lot of frustration, and misunderstanding that people feel, but I can also feel how it creates this sense of bonding and camaraderie because we're all in this together and we're trying to support each other through this. So with that being said, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen because I need to shift to the Starling Minds program. Give me all 1 second. There we go. So very quickly, if you go into the webinar section here, on the left-hand navigation, you click on Hormone and Health. Scroll all the way down. This is session 1 from today. If you click on that, you'll see here recording will be available on May 23rd, so by the end of this week. And then if you scroll down, this is the homework, this is the community that we were talking about. So with that being said, we'll open it up for questions. In the invitation and in the email, we said that we're going to have 10 to 15 minutes of questions after session 1 and session 2. For those who need to drop off at the hour, thank you so much for being here. We see that there are around 75 questions, which is amazing. It's great that there is so much interest. I don't think we're going to go through all of them, but we can start. And Paula, I'm going to read through the questions out loud, and then we can speak about them, and then we can move forward with that. And just before doing that, I would like to send the last poll to get people's feedback, and we'll do that in parallel. If you can share your feedback with us, that would be great. Okay, so let's see. What is your advice for perimenopause in terms of hormone replacement in lieu of HRT, MHT meds?
So I'm a very big proponent of bioidentical hormone replacement therapy. I will keep this short. It's a very long conversation. What happened was that most women in their perimenopause, menopausal years in the States, for example, were on some kind of synthetic hormone replacement therapy. Then in the 90s, we had the Women's Health Initiative, which was set out to be a study to show how effective hormones were for women. But what happened after a short while is the interpretation of the data, which was an incorrect interpretation, led the researchers to screaming from the rooftops, oh my goodness, stop giving women hormones, it's going to give them cancer. And from there, the conversation completely shifted. Millions of dollars of lawsuits ensued. What happened was, really not long after, the exact same researchers went right back up to the same rooftops and said, oh my goodness, we were wrong. That's actually not the case. But that message, unfortunately, didn't grab the media's attention. And so decades later, we're still left with this lingering wrongful information, including your doctor's education, that hormone replacement therapy is wrong. If I told you that you had a greater risk of a hormone-dependent cancer or of a blood clot from taking the birth control pill than you are from bioidentical hormones, that would probably make you think twice. So bioidentical hormones obviously are not for 100% of women. If there are important personal medical history or family medical history events, then you may not be a candidate. But for the vast majority of women, they are great candidates for it. You must work with a hormone literate doc. If that's not your gynecologist, if that's not your GP, then it will be your naturopathic doctor. Any doctor who says, don't bother testing, it's useless to test for hormones. Any doctor who doesn't run testing of hormones before you start to get a baseline, and then about 6 to 8 weeks after you start to adjust, if that's not part of their practice, that may not be the doc that you want to be working with. There is no set doses. It all needs to be individualized to get the most benefit.
Thank you so much. I think there are many questions around hormonal therapy, so that's great that you've shared this. The person is asking, I've been experiencing digestion issues, changes in my bowel, and my doctor is saying everything is normal from my stool sample. Can this be linked to perimenopause? I'm 42.
Most definitely. What we have to understand is that the gut microbiome is intimately connected with our reproductive hormones. By gut microbiome, I'm talking about the gazillions of bugs that live in all of our digestive tracts. So we must remember that we are 10 times more bugs than we are human. It's that those cells are a lot smaller, so then you see this instead of all those wiggly moving bugs. And the majority of those bugs live in the digestive tube, and we want them. We need them for so much balance. And when the gut microbiome is out of balance, compounding with an estrogen dominant state of perimenopause, you can for sure develop irritable bowel or maybe even inflammatory bowel symptoms. If your stool test was done by a regular doc, what they're testing is extremely limited. And so unless you've gotten basically C. difficile infection from the hospital or some kind of really bad food poisoning, they're not going to pick up this gut microbiome dance. So it is very possible. It's about figuring out which comes first, the chicken or the egg, and you usually have to work on both of them in parallel. Really great probiotics, cleaning up the diet, maybe some herbs to clean up and reset the gut microbiome, probably some liver support to help get rid of that extra estrogen and support the progesterone with some Vitex. Some suggestions.
Thank you, Paula. There's a question here that I think might be relevant to many women. If you don't have your menstrual cycle anymore, how do you know when to have your hormones checked?
If you don't have a menstrual cycle, then you do it at any time in the month because you're not cycling.
Mm-hmm.
And then it is up to the knowledge of the doc to interpret them, depending on your age, depending on when you last had your period. If you're on the pill or any kind of hormonal birth control, there's absolutely no point to test because your hormonal reality is being totally suppressed. So we're going to be testing something and looking at the drug. We're not going to be looking at you.
Amazing. Thank you, Paula. Yeah, there's a lot of questions about blood testing during menopause, during perimenopause, and essentially during these phases, what you're saying is because there's no fluctuate or no cycle, then we can test at any stage during perimenopause or menopause.
Nope.
Oh.
Perimenopause, you're still probably having some kind of a cycle. If you are, then I generally recommend getting that blood test snapshot between day 18 and day 21. So if I get my period today, but I'm not going to get another one for 3 months, it doesn't matter because as of today, I'm going to count 18 days and then I'm going to go for my blood scan. If you're like, well, I haven't had a period in 6 months, then just go anytime.
This question came up a few times as well around hysterectomies.
Yeah.
And can you speak about how that affects a woman's cycle, and what perhaps to watch out for?
So it depends if it's a partial hysterectomy or a complete hysterectomy, right? So the partial hysterectomy is that the uterus has been removed, potentially for uterine fibroids, for example, but they've left the fallopian tubes and the ovaries. Complete hysterectomy, with or without the cervix, all of it's gone. So if there's a complete hysterectomy, and you haven't reached menopause yet, then you will be put into what's called medical menopause, right? And so women who've had a complete hysterectomy most of the time are not candidates for hormone replacement therapy because they've had to have the complete hysterectomy for some kind of a hormonal challenge. There is so much that we can do with magnesium, fish oils, vitamin E, St. John's wort, meditation, cleaning up the food, the gut microbiome in terms of helping to regain a balance. And any kind of structural surgical change, I'm a very big proponent of working with a very good osteopath to work on the structural reality. Because we go in there and take out organs and say, oh, you're fine. Okay, we don't need it to live, but there's a place there and that things are going to move and shift and have an impact.
Fascinating. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Thank you very much, Paula. How do you deal with extreme vaginal dryness?
So extreme vaginal dryness, I'm a really big fan of using bioidentical estrogen cream. So you can use estrogen topically where you insert it into the vagina. Usually it's called estriol. A very small percentage of the estrogen that we insert vaginally is going to get absorbed. Most of it just works locally. If for whatever reason you're not a candidate for that, there's this really awesome product that you can get online or at the pharmacy. It's called Gynatrof, Gynatrof, and it's hyaluronic acid. So don't get turned off by the word acid in the vagina. We make it all the time. It's already in there. And both of those, whether it's the estrogen or the hyaluronic acid, work at plumping back up the vaginal cells and the vaginal tissue. Place to start.
That's great Great to know. Great information. Um, I had a male doctor. This is less of a question, more of a comment, and I think it's valuable to share with everyone here because I think a lot of us can relate. I had a male doctor dismiss me and give me a year's supply of birth control. I was trying to get pregnant at the time. Yeah, it's
It's really sad. I'm sorry.
and it is something, and this is one of the reasons why Paula and I are so passionate about talking about this and really to start empowering ourselves with this knowledge and understanding, questioning what is given to us and being more curious and perhaps asking for second opinions and third ones sometimes as well.
You've got to just keep in mind only what's in the toolkit can be recommended. So if that's what's in the toolkit and you want to get other info, you got to go another direction.
Thank you. We'll take maybe another 2 questions. And the first one, can you address how hormonal IUD and I guess perhaps as well birth control can affect symptoms of perimenopause? There's a person saying they have a very erratic period, a bit of weight fluctuation, and other symptoms, and they're turning 50 in a couple of months.
So what we need to remember about a hormonal IUD or the birth control pill is that most of the time it's a combination of a synthetic estrogen and progestin. And that's a really important word. Progestin is not progesterone. It's a synthetic molecule that looks a lot like progesterone. And so it'll give similar progesterone type of effects when we want to manipulate that where it comes to the uterus. But what about, remember that slide where we looked at all the other body systems that benefit from progesterone and estrogen? They all get starved of the benefits of that when you're taking a hormone that is progestin. And so we're seeing so many studies correlating birth control or hormonal manipulation with increased risk of thyroid issues, of social anxiety, of much more difficulty dealing with day-to-day stressors, vaginal and digestive changes to the microbiome, etc. So women don't have a lot of choices. If you want something for contraception and if it's a good fit, I would suggest having conversations around a copper IUD and letting the hormones get put by the wayside so that your own hormones can come in, can be evaluated and then supported. So if you're dealing with perimenopause and your doctor just gives you the birth control pill, know that it's just about suppressing the hormones as opposed to trying to bring that balance that we all need. You have other body systems that need those hormones and benefit from them.
Thank you, Paula. And finally, the last question for today. And again, a question that can be relevant for many of us. Are supplements safe with most medication, antidepressant, etc.? I'm looking to ensure that I boost my intake and worry that I do not get enough in my diet.
So that's a really important question. Most supplements like omega-3, B vitamins, magnesium, for the most part, those are very safe to take. Once you start going into really high doses or maybe using plants like curcumin, St. John's wort, ginkgo biloba, then those are going to have potential interactions with your drugs. So if your pharmacist is knowledgeable and can help you, great. Know that your conventional doc has no training in any of these types of medicine, so can't help you. Otherwise, your naturopathic doctor, that's part of our training. We are to know indications and contraindications.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Paula. I think we'll stop here with the question for today. Again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us.
Thanks, and thanks so much, everyone. I'm really looking forward to next week, and hopefully we can try to leave a little bit more time for Q&A.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our second and final session of our Hormones and Health series. So a quick reminder of our goals. Our goals for this workshop is to help us understand how our hormones fluctuate through the different phases of our lives so that we can better learn how to support ourselves because knowledge is power. We have explored last week the different changes in our hormones from menstruation to perimenopause to menopause and beyond. We've also explored nutrition and exercises, pardon, and how to implement in a strategic way both nutrition and exercise to support our hormonal balancing. Today, we'll be looking at how to thrive as well. So, we'll be looking at supporting ourselves through stress management techniques, understanding how women and men deal with stress differently. We'll also be exploring practices to support us with better sleep and understanding how toxins can be hormonal disruptors that we might not even be aware of.
Okay, so I'm going to kick off our first session here. And what I would just like to reiterate is I continue to see this time and time again in my day-to-day practice. I think it is ingrained in our culture, in our conditioning, that when we have a health challenge, we go see a healthcare provider for the fix, for the one thing that's going to make the symptom go away. And that's largely how conventional medicine is built with great efficacy. But if you want to go beyond symptom management, then most of the time it really involves at your pace laying down sustainable and what resonates with you in terms of foundations of health. And like Tara said, the foundations of health that we covered last week are nourishment and movement. And this week, we're going to talk about rest and stress management and environmental toxin loads. And so, again, we're going to touch about this at the end of the lecture, but I just want to bring it into the top part is that the wellness culture can be quite toxic in the sense of where you need to be a part of a certain income bracket, already have a certain physique, already be part of a certain socioeconomic demographic to participate in a wellness culture. And although I disagree with so much of that, that is often the prominent voice. But know that you have so many tools, even in just our last week's talk and this week's talk, of what you can do in laying down those bricks. And they don't have to include a $10 fancy organic kale smoothie from the place around the corner. That actually, that coming in your plastic cup is probably going to give you a lot more disservice than, let's say, focusing on getting social jet lag out of your life. And we're going to talk about some of those important pillars. So I can't stress enough the importance of taking the time, prioritizing at your pace, always at your pace, laying down these foundations of health. So with that in mind, let's talk about stress and stress management. I have a real issue with the word stress. I find that we use it like candy. I'm stressed, you're stressed, we're all stressed. And so what happens is it just kind of normalizes it. And as the wonderful Dr. Gaber Mate, Canadian doctor, whom I just love, he's probably 82 now, as he wrote in his fantastic book, The Norm is Not Normal, The Myth of Normal, right? So what we live as our norm isn't normal in so many ways. But if we bring it down to our talk tonight, it's not normal in how we are wired. And this wiring in our nervous system is so fundamental for all of us to understand. You know, I've got a teenage daughter, and I'm so happy to see that they're bringing like home ec back into school. There are fundamentals of using power tools and of knowing how to, boil an egg and understanding the circuitry of the stress response that I think we all should be having at fundamental levels. So what am I even talking about? Okay, so grab your water or your tea, get cozy. I'm going to take a few minutes to go through a physiology lesson. When we say that we're triggered by stress, what we're actually triggering is our survival mechanism. Let that sink in for a sec. Your survival mechanism, meaning there's something that you are perceiving as a threat to your survival, is happening when you're stuck in traffic, when you're dealing with a toxic colleague, when you're dealing with deadlines, when you're multitasking. All of these little stressors or big that we deal with kind of from morning till night are eliciting our survival response when they're not kept in check. And that's one of the wonderful things about a platform like Starling Minds is that it really helps to teach you about that. And Tara's going to take over that part in a little bit. So what we need to understand is that we have two zones in our nervous system. We have the voluntary kind, like I want to pick up my pen. Okay, done. We're going to leave that one aside. Then we have the automatic, not voluntary one, which is my heart's beating, my lungs are pumping, my digestion's doing its thing. These are all involuntary things that are happening all the time. That involuntary autonomic nervous system has two train tracks, the normal and the survival mode. So see those two words, the normal relaxation, homeostasis, when your body's doing all of its normal functioning, it's where we're supposed to live most of the day. So that's the communication in the body where it's time to digest a meal. It's time to fight an infection. It's time to procreate, so you have libido. It's time to have a nice regular period. It's time to have a nice pee. It's time to do all of these things. We feel good. We're happy. No problem sleeping. All of those mechanisms are quickly switched into a survival mode when you perceive that there's a lion, tiger, or bear who's just come into your visual field. If you see that lion come in, which might be the traffic, the multitasking, or the deadlines, all of those normal homeostasis, as we call them, functionings that I just listed, they stop. It's not time for that. Your body needs to take all of those resources and energy and shunt them over to your heart so it can start beating fast, your lungs so they can start pumping hard, and your muscles so that you can either fight that lion or run from it, the fight or flight response. And if you manage to survive that encounter with the lion, your nervous system, boop, is just supposed to go back into its normal mode. So we have this incredible circuit to increase our chances of survival, not to live in. And so what we do in our society is before our feet even touch the ground out of bed, so many of us are in that running from the lion mode. We spend most of our day there. And then we have this illusion that at the end of the day, at 8, 9, 10, 11 o'clock, we're supposed to just tell our nervous system, okay, the lion's over. Now go back into normal mode. Well, you do that for a long enough time and you can't do it anymore. And anxiety and depression, OCD, all kinds of challenges on the mental health front, let alone the physical front, can now start to rack up. So the first main take-home thing that I wanted to share with all of you was this is how your nervous system works. Get to know it because you can do something about it. You can have agency over it. All right, let's move on.
Thank you,
All right,
Paula.
you're welcome. And so I believe now Tara gets to take over.
Yeah. Yeah, I just really appreciate what you just shared, how you spoke about the nervous system, um, because we do live in this fight or flight nervous system for so long, and it becomes the norm, even though if it's not normal.
Exactly.
And in session one, we spoke about how we are not small men, and I want to reiterate here as well that we are not small men. The fight or flight response is activated by, like Paula said, the sympathetic nervous system, this response to stress or danger or perceived threat, or the bear or the tiger, the traffic light, the colleague, the conversation that was heavy and charged. And while both men and women experience this response, how it manifests and how we regulate it is different between men and women due to our hormonal and neurological differences. So I want to speak about these responses from both sides so that we really understand as well that perhaps what might work for someone else will not work for us. And so for women, what we call the tend and befriend response is what we usually see as most beneficial. So in addition to the fight or flight, women often exhibit this tend or befriend pattern where we're seeking social support, we're seeking nurturing relationships during stressful times. We need to speak about it, we need to exteriorize it, we need to vocalize it, and to feel seen and heard when we're doing that. And that by itself is very healing, and that is very grounded when it's done with the right people in a safe environment, not keeping it all for ourselves. So that is something that is quite, I would say, simple. And sometimes it's not easy to do, but it's simple to do. For men, it's more the classic fight or flight system, where men are more likely to respond perhaps with physical action, sometimes with confrontation, with aggression, or perhaps even withdrawal. When we think about the hormones that are influenced, for us women, estrogen, oxytocin play a key role in moderating the stress response. In session 1, we saw how before our menstruation and during menstruation and even after menopause, how estrogen is really low, and that might cause more sensitivity, more irritability in the body. So estrogen plays a key role in here, and oxytocin as well. So promotes the sense of connection and caregiving. When we look at the hormones that are influenced more for men, we're looking at testosterone and adrenaline that drive this more intense and physiological response. So we can see, if we were seeing a graph, we could see a spike in the blood pressure, and we can see a spike in insulin level. We can see a heart rate, we can see muscle tension, even though we might feel that as well as women. Cortisol sensitivity, and I think we can do a whole session on cortisol. But cortisol is the stress hormone, and as women, we are more sensitive to cortisol. We naturally have a spike of cortisol in the morning. And so when we speak about eating more food in the morning and not fasting, it's to really decrease that cortisol to tell the body that we're safe. Women are more sensitive to cortisol, which means that we're more sensitive to chronic stress if the cortisol is not properly maintained. And that can lead to anxiety, fatigue, and hormonal imbalances. When we look at it, our nervous system as a whole, what regulates our nervous system is parasympathetic activities. What that looks like is mindfulness practices, simple breathing exercises, some yoga, some meditation. All of that can help bring us back to the present, help us get out of this fight or flight space and into more of a parasympathetic nervous system. The more we practice this on a small scale, when perhaps we're feeling a bit triggered, if we practice coming back to the parasympathetic system, the more we're able to be resilient, and the more we'll be able to do it in bigger situations when perhaps we're in high conflict. We'll be able to come back into the parasympathetic the more we practice it.
If I may, Tara, before you go on to all of the impacts of stress, or some of them, I just want to share that what Tara mentioned of the relationship with cortisol, which is our main stress go fight or flight hormone, and something like estrogen, is so incredibly important, because so often in my practice, women will come in with some kind of hormonal challenge, whether it's PMS, whether it's fertility, PCOS, irregular cycles, perimenopause, menopause, and their expectation or the conditioning is that we need to work on sex hormones. And although we'll do a lot of evaluating, test those, look at those, there's always the aspect of cortisol that I'll always bring in. And of course, thyroid hormones. And like Tara mentioned, insulin. So I think what's important here to just highlight is that all of these hormones are like the kids in a family. And like siblings, they're all going to influence each other. And often the the neglected one is going to be cortisol, in the sense of where countless times I've been able to work with a patient without directly needing to address their estrogen or progesterone levels, but just working on their cortisol, whether that's through plants, vitamins, minerals, glandulars, high protein, obviously meditation, guided breathing exercises, therapy, what have you, whatever the case may be. So just to keep that in your back pocket, that when you're looking at hormonal aspects, don't forget that cortisol might be a really key player that is not being addressed.
Yeah. Thank you, Paula. All right, let's continue with some signs of high stress. So we spoke about stress, we spoke about how it impacts us. Now let's explore more what are some signs of high stress that we might feel. So we said when stress is high, cortisol level increase. This can trigger glucose in the bloodstream, which is what what happens after that is that insulin response. Insulin is another hormone, and when insulin responds, it takes the sugar that or the glucose that is in the bloodstream and brings it back to the cell. Now, if there's stress that is chronic and it keeps on happening, and there's keeps on getting cortisol spikes, eventually there's going to be what we call insulin resistance, and we won't be as sensitive to insulin. And so what happens is that the the glucose stays in the bloodstream, and that can create all sorts of imbalances or diseases in the body and the mind. We can look at an immune system that is more compromised. We can look at mental health concerns such as anxiety, such as depression. We might have cardiovascular strains. We can have risk of hypertension, digestive disturbances, a greater risk for IBS and gastritis, poor sleep that might lead to perhaps insomnia or disrupt sleeping patterns, fertility issues, PCOS, endometriosis, weight gains or difficulty with weight management, any cognitive decline, memory loss, foggy memory, and a low sex drive. And these are few of many things that we might feel eventually with chronic stress. So I'd like to run a question, the first poll here, to again think about raising our self-awareness a bit more and understanding what might be. Oh, that's the wrong poll. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna end this poll. Here you go. I believe this is the one. Yes. So here you can find a question where we ask, how is stress presenting itself for you? And you can have more than one answer. Taking the ones that are the most relevant for you. And the reason why we're asking this here is again to start thinking about how stress manifests in your life. How does it manifest in your body? The more you know how it manifests, and for example, let's say it's muscle tension, the moment you start noticing more muscle tension in the body, you can start thinking, okay, I might feel a bit more stressed now. And then you can course correct and look at strategies to support you with decreasing the stress in your body and in your mind. So I'll give you a few moments to answer this poll. This is also a great daily check-in that you can quickly ask yourself. How am I feeling? Where is stress presenting itself in my body?
And I think if I can add this exercise and Tara's invitation to try to sort of connect your mind and your body can be really helpful, because in a type of a situation where I see a lot of patients with IBS, so irritable bowel syndrome of all different types, And we'll go through maybe a 6 to 10 week gut reset protocol where we really reset their gut microbiome. Their symptoms are by and large gone. Well, at the end of that, when we get that significant improvement, I'll share with them what to look out for if their symptoms seem to return. And one of the common triggers of symptoms returning is going to either be high stress moments or embarking in a period of chronic stress. And so what can be really helpful there is that by resetting the gut microbiome, they kind of get a new baseline of what their new normal is. So there's less noise and less factors that are influencing that and at play. And then they get to sort of watch what happens as the days and weeks and months go by. And if there is sort of a return of symptoms or a regression, and then they're able to identify what's been going on in my life. Where are my sleep patterns? How am I eating? How am I breathing? And, what's going on with my stress levels? And that can be really helpful because that's all very empowering, where then you learn the tools of how to pick up those signs that things are on their way in that direction, and then what you can do about it, or maybe some big life questions that, you start asking yourself around work or relationships or housing or what have you. So just something to think about.
Absolutely. So looking at the results here, well, first of all, we see that there's a very big spread, and I want to just mention that we all feel stress and we all feel it in one way, shape, or form. And thank you all for sharing. And I hope that you can see through this answer that you're not alone in this struggle. So we can see that muscle tension is quite high, fatigue is quite high, and irritability as well. I believe these are the three highest ones. Sleep problems comes in, and then concentration problems, and they're all interconnected and interrelated, right, Paula? I feel like, if we're not sleeping well, then we might be more irritable, and then that might create headaches, and then we might feel more restless, and we're more vulnerable for injury. We might feel muscle tension. So they're all really interconnected as well in one way or another. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing your answers, everyone. So one way that I personally find very useful and beneficial of being more resilient to stress is self-awareness. And really the purpose of these sessions is to empower you to be more self-aware, to learn more about yourself, to ask yourself the right questions, because it's through that we're able to course correct. And one great tool, a mindfulness tool that can be used to raise our self-awareness, is the window of tolerance. Some of you might be familiar with this window of tolerance from previous workshops. Essentially, the window of tolerance is a great tool to understand if we are actually in this window where we're able to be present, where we're able to take in information, where we're calm, we're grounded, we're collected, we're centered, or if we are in a hypo or hyper arousal space. If we're in the hypo aroused space, which is a 1 or a 2 here in this slide, usually what happens is we tend to be in a more dissociative space where we numb, and it's a way of coping or protecting ourselves, where we're not able to take in information, where we dissociate from a specific situation. When we're in a hyper aroused space, where we can see here an 8 or a 9, this is where we feel overwhelmed, overstimulated, where we might feel more heart palpitations, more sweating, where our body feels anxious, where our thoughts are racing, and we're again not able to be present or take in information. So just think about perhaps where you usually fall, and if you feel inclined or inspired to share that in the chat, we'd love to have you write just the number that that you most resonates with you. Do you usually fall within your window of tolerance? Are you usually more hyper aroused or hypoaroused, just writing the number. And again, checking in with yourself before writing that number. I'm just curious to know. You see 893, 898, 2. A lot of 8s, a lot of 7s, a lot of 9s, a lot of 2s as well. So we can see a lot of people are usually either in the hyper or the hypo arousal space, mainly in the hyper as well. So the beauty about mindfulness is that it can bring us back into that space of a regulated space, or in our window of tolerance. It can not just bring us back into this space, but it can help us know when we're out of that space, so that we have that knowledge and then we can come back into this space of awareness. One practice that I'd love us to do here together is what we call the breath of awareness. And this is based from the mindfulness, it's based from the mindfulness-based stress reduction practices that fall under cognitive behavioral therapy. This is a practice that helps us widen our attention when we're in moments of stress, because we usually focus our attention into one single point, a rumination of a thought, of a feeling, of an action, a behavior. So it helps us widen our attention, do the opposite, choose an anchor so that we can step out of our minds more into our body, and then help us come back into more of a centered attention. So I'd love us to do this practice together. And you can either do this with eyes closed if you feel comfortable doing that, or you can gaze softly to this beautiful nature picture. And this is a really simple practice, and it's intentionally simple so that you can take it home and practice it with you in moments of stress. And I even encourage you to practice it when you're not feeling stress, to build more of that internal resilience. So find that comfortable seat. Again, perhaps straightening your spine, relax your shoulders, open your chest. Feel the weight of the body against a chair, feet flat on the ground. And again, allow your eyes to close or to soften. And take a moment to feel the whole sense of your whole body sitting here. Allow your attention to move to the physical sensations of breathing, without manipulating or changing the way you're breathing. Not having to really think about breathing, simply notice the sensation of the air that is flowing in and out of your body. Keeping your attention as best you can on the various sensations associated with breathing. You might be feeling the coolness of the air at the tip of your nostrils as you breathe in, the chest gently expanding, or the belly rising and the falling on the out breath. You're observing with curiosity and awareness the full duration of your inhale, the full duration of your exhale. Noticing where the sensations of breathing are the most prominent. Is it the nostrils, the chest, the belly? And whenever you notice that your attention has moved away from the sensations of breathing, without judging, Simply note that and bring yourself back to observing your breath. And if it helps, you can label the experience as thinking, planning, worrying, without judging. Whenever you notice it, if you note it, bring it back. Bring yourself back to the sensations of breathing. Simply observing the natural flow of the breath. And if the attention wanders away from the breath 1,000 times, as it may, again, gently bring it back 1,000 times. It's not that you're doing anything wrong. It's simply that you're noticing something important about the mind. And it's a wave, just as the ocean waves. Gently coming back to observing your breath. And sitting here in silence and in stillness, bringing a gentle, a patient awareness to your breath. Accepting your breathing as it is. And whenever you see or notice the attention has moved away, simply being aware of that, letting go of that and coming back to breathing. Returning attention to the sensation of breathing over and over again. Staying present. And in this way, you're allowing the breath to be an anchor to the present moment. And then when you're ready, you can let go of the observation. And gently blinking your eyes back open. And coming back to this space, this room together. And so a quick note on what we just did here. What we did is we focused our attention on our breath without changing the breath, without manipulating the breath, simply bringing our awareness to breathing. And the reason why we did that, and we came over and over back to the breath every time our mind wanders, is because usually when we're in stressful situations, we're going to think about something that is going to make us think about something else. And then we might ruminate and create a whole story in our heads. This practice of bringing ourselves back to the anchor, which in this case was the breath, helps us stop this rumination, helps us stop this overthinking, and to come back to the present moment. And we might do it, like I said, 1,000 times, and that's okay, releasing the judgment of it, but bringing ourselves back to the present moment. And with time, this practice helps us stay more present, more centered, and more in a reality and less in the rumination thoughts. Thank you, everyone. So I'd like to quickly move into this idea of normalizing our emotions and our emotional landscape, because we often feel, as women also, we often carry generational and societal expectation around how we should feel, how we shouldn't feel. You know, we sometimes even gaslight ourselves by saying, oh, I'm too emotional, it's that time of the month. But suppressing our emotion is not resilience. Resilience is really bringing presence and response to our emotions. So an invitation is to bring curiosity rather than judgment to your emotions, to ask yourself these questions, such as, what is this emotion trying to tell me? Where do I feel it in my body? What does it need right now? So that you understand what imbalances might happen. And so you can give yourself grace and compassion when you're going through a harder, more challenging time. And like we mentioned, leaning on practices like breath work or grounding techniques or naming the feeling out loud or naming the thought, having some sort of movement practice or mindfulness and self-compassion can really be beneficial here in these practices. Before we move into improving our sleep, I just want to give a quick note, and I might just show this at the end of the session, that in the Starling Minds program, we have a mood tracker that can help you track your mood, specifically if the moods that you've been feeling are more uncomfortable, like stress or anxiety or fear or sadness. If you're to track these moods on a regular basis, you might discover that there is a pattern around when you feel this and your behavior, perhaps. So, for example, if you're skipping a meal in the morning and you're starting to feel anxious, or you're drinking coffee on an empty stomach, or you're taking your phone first thing in the morning and checking the news, and that might create anxiety. All of these are ways for you to learn how to track and bring that self-awareness up by using the mood tracker. And I'll show you a bit more about that later on. But now we'll move into improving our sleep, and I'll pass it back to Paula.
Thanks so much for that, Tara. I think everybody's just going to be feeling a little bit more mellow. So I got to keep my eye on the time. But thank you so much. And just to share on a personal note, a lot of that last slide, normalizing the emotional landscape that Tara was talking about, an acronym that I find really helpful is RAIN. Many of you may know about it. The great Tara Brach writes and talks about it extensively. So RAIN is in RAIN as an acronym to help work through when the emotions are coming up. So R is giving yourself permission to recognize what's happening. A is giving yourself permission to allow the emotion to be there without needing to change it or for it to be anything different. The I stands for investigate, which is the curiosity that Tara was talking about in terms of what is going on here? What is this about? Where am I feeling this in my body? And I often like using the work of another great Dr. David Hawkins, who just keeps coming back to what's this really about? What's this really about? And you can just keep asking yourself that question and just watch yourself kind of spiral into a much closer nucleus of it's just about I want to be loved. I want to be accepted. I want to be heard. I want to be cared for, whatever that might be. And then the N of RAIN stands for non-attachment, where we can just bear witness to all of this happening in our present moment without the voices of the conditioning of the judgment and the criticisms often coming in. So that's just my little added tidbit on that front. All right, so with regards to sleep, so some, boring statistics. We used to sleep a lot more than we do now. Okay. So what we need to understand is what are our needs for sleep? And that's really quite fascinating. The average, so by far, the most 85 to 90% of adults need 7 to 9 hours of mainly consecutive sleep. What's considered normal sleep is it takes up to 30 minutes to fall asleep, and that we sleep consecutive hours with maybe one, max two wake ups, but usually just one for a pee, and then we fall back asleep. Anything that's outside of that, taking an hour and a half to fall asleep, getting that 3 a.m. wake up and then being awake and super alert for an hour or an hour and a half or even 2 hours, any of those waking up multiple times, those are all criteria for insomnia. And so what we do understand is that women do need more sleep than men. And I think I have seen that come out on news feeds recently, just to give again that education. We need to remember that up until the 1980s, women were not really studied on in the scientific world in terms of how pharmaceutical drugs impact women's bodies. And to be honest, there hasn't been that much of an explosion of studying women's physiology in response to medication since then. And so, what's important is for us to remember that our bodies are different in so many ways. Hormonally is more than enough to just blanket that statement. So, we do have different sleep needs. Our hormones are going to definitely impact our sleep, whether it's through the menstrual cycle, PMS time. So a lot of women will have insomnia, PMS, or at ovulation time, whether it's during pregnancy. I remember with my first, I basically traded my partner in for a body pillow. And to his dismay, 15 years later, I still use that body pillow. So the physical discomfort is a real reality for a lot of women in their pregnancies. Perimenopause and menopause, just the insomnia by itself, let alone hot flashes and night sweats, can be a really important impact there. And like I made a little bit of a mention to as being the stress cortisol piece, where, if any of you feel like, boom, you can almost set your clock to it. You're waking up 2:30 to 3:30 and you're awake. It's like you could get out of bed and do the laundry or get some work done. And that's often your stress hormone that's spiking at the wrong time. So um, these are important things to keep in mind with our differences with sleep. And if we want to look at the next slide, what I've done is kind of highlighted some recommendations of like a bedtime routine. So this ties into what I talked about before when I was giving that story of how our nervous system works. And how for so many of us, the alarm goes off in the morning, and before our feet even hit the ground, we're in the to-do list for the day. We rev on that gear for most of the day, and then come 8, 9, 10, 11 o'clock, we've just got this expectation that we're going to be able to just turn that all off and then boom, be able to fall asleep. Well, what we need to remember is many of us may need a little bit of a transition from the go, go, go of the day to telling your nervous system, that's all done. Let's get ready for rest. And so a routine that does not involve these things is going to be really important. So what I hear time and time and time and time again is I relax by doom scrolling. I relax on social media. I relax by watching something. And I'm like, look, you do you. You can do all of those things, but let me make it clear that's distract, not relax. It's not the same thing. And so you're not giving your message to your nervous system in the same way. And then, of course, we know all of the lights and the electric magnetic frequencies coming from our devices can really interfere with our melatonin production and our circadian rhythms, which is basically our rhythm of our day-night cycles. So I'll propose 30 to 60 minutes before you want to be in bed to really start dimming things down. The ideal temperature for a bedroom has been shown to be 18 to 19 degrees Celsius. You want to put the devices away. Flight mode is the way to go. In this idea of a circadian rhythm where we follow more closely the cycles of day and night, which is supposed to come through natural light, which we're not exposed to, that doesn't include what comes through your window, and feeds in through the eyes to what's called our pineal gland. That's the master maker of melatonin. Through all of that communication, your master gland knows if it's day or night. So if it needs to produce melatonin to get you to sleep or not. And so when we're under or in front of all of these big lights, and meanwhile the sun is setting or is already set outside, your body doesn't know it's nighttime. Your body thinks it's still daytime because it hasn't gotten that message. So start dimming the lights. I'll often recommend to use blackout blinds, to maybe use an eye patch, to use earplugs for those who tend to be more light sleepers to minimize distractions. In terms of the drink or fluid intake or liquid intake, if you're someone who tends to get up to pee a lot at night, especially for the perimenopause, menopause time, then you want to stop your liquids a few hours before bed. The snacking thing is a hit or miss. You're going to need to try it out to see what works best for you. Go back, or I invite you to go back to last week's talk where Tara and I talked a lot about nourishment and getting those protein requirements of 20, 25, even 30 grams of protein 3 times a day. Some might even need a little bit of a high protein snack if you're eating dairy, a nice big fat piece of cheese. Otherwise, it can be, maybe a couple of pieces of tofu or a big glass of soy milk. These are all options that will give you some of that protein hit, because if you go back to our talk, the protein is going to help balance out that whole blood sugar stress hormone thing that can get really wonky and cause us to bing, wake up in the middle of the night. Okay, so those are, and of course, sleepy time teas, a guided meditation practice. I'm a really big fan of the school of guided meditation called Yoga Nidra to really help shift the nervous system. Fantastic Canadian, Ali Boothroyd, who is everywhere free on YouTube. She's got guided meditations up to 8 hours long. So there are all of those pieces that can be really helpful as well. Journaling, get it all out, to-do lists, gratitude journals, get it out so that it doesn't ruminate in here. All right, so that's some of the sleep hygiene. There's a nice warm bath in there. Epsom salts are great because they're very high in magnesium. Magnesium helps us chill out. A lot of people, especially women, will take magnesium to improve their sleep. Could potentially improve hot flashes, night sweats, constipation, anxiety, lots of stuff. And then you've got some recommendations of some what are called nervine calming herbs for sipping a tea, making sure that it doesn't keep you up at night being, and then yin yoga, guided meditations, all of that stuff. Okay. And so again, those are just a couple of the parameters of what we're looking for ideally at the top of the slide. At the bottom of the slide, I want to mention a couple of things. One, I made mention to social jet lag at the beginning of my starting this part of the talk. And two are the hours of sleep. So in the traditional Chinese medical model, the hours of sleep before midnight are considered to be the most restorative. So what that means is that, like it says in your slide, if you're getting a sleep from 10 to 6, you're going to benefit far more from those 8 hours of sleep than if you were to shift it to 1 to 9 a.m. So try to keep that in mind. A lot of individuals with cortisol, stress hormone dysregulation, they'll get this crazy second wind at 10, 10:30 because they ignored what their body was telling them at 8:30, 9:30 that it was time to start going to bed. And so they get this next wave and now they're like, forget it, I'm not going to sleep. So there are all kinds of tricks that we can start working on to kind of start scooching that sleep time back. With regards to social jet lag, this is something that was in a lot of the, stuff that comes to us in all of these feeds from Dr. Huberman, Andrew Huberman, who's got some cool stuff to say. I'm not the biggest fan, but he's got some cool stuff to say. And he talked a lot about social jet lag, so that became more popular. Going to bed at approximately the same hour every night is fundamental to having more restorative sleep, to dealing with insomnia, and having more energy and a restful sleep. So that's really tough depending on your age, right? So if you're in your 20s and 30s and, living large and you like going out Thursday nights, Friday nights, Saturday nights, but then the rest of the week you're kind of chilling at home, well, those huge changes in your sleep patterns can really have a not so great impact. So that's why we call it jet lag, but not because you've changed time zones, but because your social calendar is as such. So again, tying into that whole toxic wellness of shoulds and supposed tos, if you're living your best life and enjoying it, go for it. Just know that this may be influencing things and that you have some agency to do something about it if and when that speaks to you.
Thank
All
you,
right,
Paul.
Tara, poll question, take it away.
Poll question. So we're asking here the second poll question. just based on what Paula just shared in terms of the sleep strategies, which one are you most willing to try this week? And the invitation is to try it every night of the week. Again, the consistency will be very important here. We'll give it another 10 seconds. And then we'll move into our final portion of the presentation. And I really appreciate you, Paula, mentioning this toxic wellness around, social jet lag. Knowing that for myself, at least, I find that I try to do all the good things, but I also love to go out and have
Yeah,
a really nice night of dancing and not feel
exactly.
guilty about that. And
Yeah,
really understanding that that also can be part of the balance and not be too rigid with everything.
that's right. Be
To
part
be
of your
sustainable.
wellness.
Exactly.
Here in Montreal, so I'm in Montreal. I don't know if they've started this everywhere and other places, but they've started like a Sunday 11 a.m. dance parties in coffee shops so that for, parents, for those who aren't into the drinking scene, for those who can't or don't want to do the late night scene, they're doing like full on dance parties, raves, DJs, the whole deal from like 11 to 2 on a Sunday. So I think
Great.
that's pretty awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So when we look at the answers, we can see that 49% say disconnect from devices.
Yeah, way to go.
Yes, that's a great one. I find putting my phone on airplane mode, and
Yeah.
also I put it on do not disturb for the whole day so that I don't feel distracted.
Hmm.
This is
You're more
great.
disciplined than I am.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for sharing your results. We'll move on to the final portion, hormone disruptors.
This is our final chapter. I'm looking at the time. There isn't that much time. This is a whole webinar, a year-long webinar within itself. I specialize in environmental medicine. There is a very fine line between understanding how our hormones are being completely hijacked by environmental toxins and not going into bubble mode. So, an eco anxiety. There's a real fine line between being informed and not being too consumed by this information. So, I'm going to start off by sharing sources of toxins that are hormone disruptors and what we can do about them because we do have some agency in making choice, and that's going to start with knowledge. So, in terms of what does that even mean, a hormone disruptor? The technical name is an endocrine disruptor. Endocrine just means your hormonal system. So, what happens is we have all kinds of toxins, heavy metals like mercury and lead and plastics and all kinds of stuff that's in our personal care products and in our home cleaning products. There are all kinds of these molecules that look a heck of a lot like estrogen. And so what happens is they'll come into your body and they will bind the receptors of estrogen and stimulate estrogenic activity. So we have to remember we're made up of trillions of cells, and these little cells basically are like a factory where they do something, they produce something. And the signaling of what needs to be produced and when is usually done through a communication of molecules that sit in a receptor, like a chair. When you were playing musical chairs as a kid, right? So there's four of you, but there are only three chairs, and you got to go round and round and round and round. And then when the music stops, you all have to sit down, and the person who's not sitting, they're out. Well, when you're sitting down, you are the molecule. Let's say you're the plastic toxin, and you sit in the chair. Well, you're going to induce by sitting in the chair an estrogen type of activity. And then the estrogen that's actually yours is kind of still floating around. So when we're talking about hormone disruptors in our environment, this is what they're doing. So amongst a lot of other things. So what we need to understand is that we're exposed to these toxins through what we drink, what we eat, what we breathe, and what we apply to our skin. And so this is a bit of a representative of all of this stuff comes in to the second floor of a house, and we have detoxification capacities that will allow for these toxins to come out through the front door and the main floor windows. But those detoxification capacities that we have built in us are very often overwhelmed and overloaded by the onslaught of toxins that are coming in through the chimney and to that second floor. And so that creates an imbalance where our toxin load is actually quite high. And for many of us, that actually drives chronic disease, whether it's hormonal related, inflammatory related, gut microbiome related, etc. And what we've seen over the past 10 to 15 years is that environmental toxins are a greater driver of all types of chronic disease than compared to our standard North American diet or having a really sedentary lifestyle. So, yeah, step one is get informed. So, when we're looking at plastics, we can't escape them. You go to unless you are, which is on my list. I'm in a very busy life moment. When that's going to settle down in a few months, my number one aim is I want to do a study. I want to see how long it takes me to do my family's groceries and how much it costs when I do them the typical way, which is with a lot of awareness, but stuff in plastic. And then I want to take the time, I live in the city, so I have that available to really to see how much it's going to cost and how long it'll take to do the same groceries plastic free. And I expect that it's going to take 2 to 3 times the amount of time and cost maybe 1.5 times more. I want to do that experiment and document it as a way to raise awareness that our governments have a responsibility to support us in making this more accessible and affordable. That being said, there are little things that we can do. So you go to the grocery store, you bring your cloth bags and not the plastic ones to put your fruits and veggies. When you're looking at your cleaning products, baking soda and vinegar work really well. When you're looking at, your care products, looking at ones that don't have the undesirable ingredients. So that sort of a thing is, we've got an app that's written here. It's called the Think Dirty app. These are going to help you identify more clean products. We also have the great Dr. David Suzuki, who has a website and the Environmental Working Group and Skin Deep. These are all website platforms that try to provide the do's and don'ts ingredients and maybe the more favorable products. In terms of our food and drink, what's really important is that we understand the greenwashing that happens when it says BPA-free plastic. So those water bottles that are plastic, but they're BPA-free, what they're saying is that they don't use a pretty crappy hormone disruptor called bisphenol A. Great. So you're thinking it doesn't have this, I'm good to go. Well, what happens is the vast majority of the time, they replace it with bisphenol S or F, which are actually worse. So we have to be really mindful of greenwashing and just go with stainless steel, food grade silicone, and glass as much as possible. And one thing that I have a really hard time with is the amount of individuals that I just continuously see with their to-go coffee cups and the top cap. That top cap, which is the really flimsy plastic, takes about 250 years to degrade. And in Canada, we dispose of about 1 billion cups a year, coffee cups a year, and we have to cut down 500 million trees a year to make those. So I don't have it here. I should have brought it upstairs. I'm sorry, but I've got a food grade silicone collapsible to-go mug that fits into this fantastic little sleeve for the heat. It's literally the size of your phone. If you have room for your phone, you have room for that. And so wherever you go get your coffee and your tea, you can bring that with you. So we want to try to be aware of Teflon is not a great idea, plastic cutting boards, any kind of plastic ladles and saucers and that sort of thing. So we've got some suggestions there. If you want to move on to the next slide, we'll see what else we've got. So we talked about some of those home cleaning products. Remember that anything that's fragranced or scented has unwanted hormone disrupting chemicals. So whether that's your fabric softener, your detergent, Febreze, an air freshener, and so we can use essential oils. We can use, I'm a big fan. I mean, essential oils are just everywhere with me. Diffuser, if you're in a public space or you have a public bathroom, there are a lot of different ways that we can get the results we want without increasing our toxin load. And with regards to lifestyle, yeah, wash your new clothes. So, new stuff, couches, mattresses, cars, clothes, they have flame retardants. And flame retardants are pretty nasty chemicals. And so when we buy new clothes, we definitely, in my house, the rule is you got to wash it 3 times before you can wear it. If you have the financial ability to source mattresses or couches that are flame retardant free, fantastic. If you don't, in an ideal world, it's off gassing for, a good 3 to 4 weeks before you're sleeping in it and putting your face in it. So there are a lot of different tips and tricks. Air exchangers, air filters, all of that are pretty important. In terms of food, we could have a whole conversation about organic versus non-organic. At the least, we would want to try to avoid what are called the dirty dozen. Those are the 12 to 15 most pesticided fruits and veggies of the year. And we want to try to source organic animal products, dairy, meats as much as possible. And I mean, honestly, I go to a butcher that they're not certified organic because it would be 3 times the price, but their practices are such that they grass feed their animals, their cows, and they use as few antibiotics and hormones as possible. And you can go and visit their farm, and it's a beautiful place, and the animals are super happy. So it can also be about connecting with your local food supply.
Mm. Thank you so much, Bella. That was amazing information and a lot of information. And we did create a PDF that we included in the program that has all the information about hormone disruptors and the dirty dozen that Paula mentioned as well. So we'll finish off our presentation before going into the Q&As and the homework. We'll finish off our presentation with a quick summary of these 5 main ways to support ourselves and support women's health that we looked into both sessions. The first one is nutrition. So looking at prioritizing whole foods, including protein in every single meal, enhancing healthy fats, not being afraid of fats. Healthy fats are great for us. Choosing organic when possible, referring to the Dirty Dozen list that is in the program, and limiting caffeine and alcohol intake as much as we can, especially when our estrogen is low and we're more sensitive to it. When it comes to movement, building daily movement, and we purposefully didn't say exercise, we said movement, because movement can be walking, movement can be taking the stairs, movement can be going cycling somewhere instead of taking the bus. Bringing more activity into your daily life, including strength training, is very, very important. Having also calmer and more relaxing practices to calm the nervous system. When it comes to stress and emotional well-being, practicing mindfulness, breathwork, any practice that calms your nervous system. For me, breathwork and mindfulness and meditation works well. Perhaps for you, it's a yoga practice, or perhaps it's an Epsom salt bath. Whatever works, practice it. Tracking your moods as well to just understand when you're stressed and what influences that stress. Sleep. Stick as much as possible to a consistent sleep pattern. Create a sleep routine for yourself as well. And then reducing hormonal disruptors, just as what Paula mentioned, either through reducing plastic, or through buying more organic, or perhaps using these apps to help you, Yuka and Think Dirty. And I will skip this part and we'll just finish with toxic wellness. Paula, if you want to add just a few words here.
Yeah, so this is what we've kind of sprinkled in through this part of our talk, is this notion of toxic wellness, right? And so the wellness industry is multi-billion dollar industry, just like any other big industry. And so there are influencers, and there's a look, and there's a type of person, and there's these shoulds and supposed tos, and everyone walking around in their, white leggings after their yoga class with their whatever kale juice. And it really doesn't need to be that at all. What's really important is sustainability. So like Tara mentioned with the sleep poll was, of all of these sleep hygiene suggestions, pick one, right? So start somewhere, because the mountain can feel really overwhelming. But what's really important to know is that a lot of these pieces will intermingle and kind of fall together. So if there were, some key places of where to start, I would definitely recommend hitting those high protein intakes that we talked about in the first session. Movement, it doesn't need to be doing a crazy CrossFit class 5 times a week. It can just be starting to move on your lunch break, or get out that metro stop earlier to get that extra walk, or walking on your lunch break, whatever it may be. And looking at things like on the rest front, what are some of those bedtime routines that you can start to incorporate? What I find often people will put at the last of their priority list, but potentially the most impactful, is a breathing or meditation practice, and it can be 5 to 10 minutes. And so I think Starling Minds has a lot of great information and resources there. And so, of all of these, just sort of pick one place that you want to start, and doing that in a way that works for you is going to allow for sustainability, because your well-being is not a fad. It's not an influencer. It's you being with you for the rest of your life.
Thank you, Paula. So with that being said, let's move on to the homework, and I will share the program to show you exactly where you can find this information. Give me one moment. And then we'll move on to our questions. So this is my French profile. Let me switch it to the English. Where am I? Oh, here it's supposed to, yeah, there we go. All right. So if I go into the webinar section, then you go into today's hormones and health, scroll to session 2, you'll find the homework here, where we ask you to choose 3 areas that feel the most important and doable for you to focus on. Nutrition, movement, stress, sleep, hormones, and it can be just one simple change. For those who want to download the tip sheet, you can simply click here and download the sheet. And the sheet will include, I believe you can see my sheet here, and it includes nutritional tips for hormonal balancing. It also includes the dirty dozen that we spoke about, and includes decreasing the toxic load, how to decrease the toxic load. So there's all this information here. You can read it, you can print it, you can have it on your desk. This is accessible for you. And finally, share your thoughts with the community. Always, this is a community that we build to support each other, to help each other, to learn from each other. So we really encourage you to do that. And so with that being said, we will open it up to questions now. And as we do that, I will share the last poll, because we always value your feedback. Let me do that poll. Great. And as you answer the last poll, I'll pull up the questions and start reading through the questions for Paula and myself. And again, for those who need to drop, thank you so much for joining us. This session is recorded and we will be uploading it. And you'll be receiving your certificate if you've attended the 2 live sessions or watched the recording and attended one or watched the recorded of both. So one question here, Paula, is there a probiotic you recommend for women in perimenopause? And I would add
Probiotics, yeah, go ahead.
perhaps menopause as well.
Yeah. So here's the thing about probiotics is that they're really not all created alike. There's something that's called a species and a strain of a probiotic. So for example, you might have like a lactobacillus, which is the species of the bacteria, but then the strain is going to be usually a series of letters or numbers that are right after the name of the bacteria. And when you're looking at research about, oh, this probiotic helps with fatty liver disease, this probiotic helps with urinary tract infections, it's going to be related to that strain. So the analogy that a colleague of mine taught me that I find is helpful is the species of probiotics is kind of saying like, yeah, dogs are really cool and friendly. Okay, so dogs, but are all dogs the same? No, a Chihuahua is going to be really different from a Husky. And so that's the strain specific of the probiotic. So, in terms of a general probiotic that is available in the North American market, and I think even in the European market, there are 2 that I quite like. One are the HMF, so the letters HMF. There's a whole series of HMF probiotics by Genestra. They're really great and evidence-based. And there's also by Biome Australia, which is a new company a few years old coming out of Australia with amazing research behind their specific probiotics. So those are 2 places that you can start to look.
Well, thank you, Paula.
You're welcome.
I see a few questions here around cortisol.
Yes.
People asking what are some natural ways to lower cortisol
Yeah.
and maintain balance of cortisol, understanding better what happens with cortisol in the morning as
Yeah.
well.
So I just want to share, Tara, someone is asking for contact information. So maybe if you don't mind just
Yes.
leaving that next slide, because so what the next slide will have my contact information. And so I see patients around the world, wherever you are. But I've started an Instagram account a few months ago. I post 3 times a week, and a lot of it is hormone, whether it's thyroid, cortisol, PMS, menopause, perimenopause type of information, and a lot of what's called metabolic syndrome. So if you're challenged with insulin resistance, diabetes, weight challenges, etc., there's a lot of information in there. So that might be something interesting for you to as another source of reliable information. With regards to cortisol, there is a beautiful family of herbs that are called the adaptogenic herbs, adaptogens. And as the name says, they just help you adapt better to what life is throwing at you. So the beautiful thing about most plants is that it's not like a gas pedal thing where it's either like full tilt on or full tilt off, right? A lot of herbs have the ability to modulate. So, do you need to go up a little bit? Do you need to come down a little bit? Or maybe it's just tonifying to support your body's ability to handle the stress. And so, these adaptogenic plants can include things like ashwagandha, great for the thyroid, holy basil, great for endurance and stamina, bacopa, fantastic for concentration and focus, eleutherococcus, maca, schizandra. And so these are all different types of plants. You can take a higher dose of the single ones, or I generally like to take combinations because my understanding of the plant world is that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. There's a dynamism and a communication that happens amongst plants that we get to take advantage of when we use multiple plants at the same time. So those plants can really be helpful to support cortisol levels. Either you're crashing in the afternoon, you're waking up in the middle of the night, you're generally really reactive to stress. You know, the phone rings and you jump, you're crossing the street and someone honks the car and you get startled. Those are pretty good indicators that you might need a little bit of love for your adrenal glands. And lots of magnesium and B vitamins can also be supportive to your cortisol levels and your adrenal health.
Beautiful. Thank you, Paula.
Mm.
There's a really interesting question here. You mentioned nervous system regulation through
Yes.
parasympathetic activities.
Yes.
Last session, we spoke lots about doing physical activity during different stages of the period.
Yep.
How do we make sense of this?
It's a delicate balance. It's a great question, and it's very individual. So, for example, I am a very high intensity, high revving exercise person. The past 6 months of my personal life have been very tumultuous. Everyone's healthy and wonderful, thank goodness, but there's just way too much on the plate, and we know that, and we know it's coming to an end. Well, I made the very difficult decision, difficult for me because of my conditioning and belief systems and what have you about myself, but I needed to make a very difficult decision to tone down the intense exercise. So I'm not a marathon runner or anything, but I train in Afro-Brazilian martial arts street dance very intensely. And so I have had to calm that down, talk to my teacher, tell her what my needs are at this time in my life, which she doesn't understand, but that's okay. I love her, and focus more on the instruments, playing the music, doing more yoga. This is what I need at this point in time, but I'm continuing to move. And if I were to continue the higher pace, then I think I would wind up putting on weight, having more difficult sleep, and actually being more stressed because I'm such a high rever that if I would have brought it to that next level, I know it would have been detrimental. Once these months are going to come to an end and I will have a chance to recover, I'm very much looking forward to going back to that high intensity exercise in the fall. So it's about that give and take and being connected and being honest with where am I? What do I need? And how am I willing to shift around that? So the movement's a non-negotiable for all of us. The intensity and the duration and the type do depend on where you're at and what you need. And regardless of all of that, if you're living in this current world, juggling jobs, responsibilities, all of that, you need parasympathetic support every day. And even if it's in the form of 10 minutes of box breathing.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you,
Yeah.
Paula. I just want to mention there are a few questions that are very specific
Mm.
to the person. For
Yes.
example, people sharing their glucose level, some of their other metrics, and asking for specific advice.
Yeah.
We won't be covering these questions. And
Yeah.
Paula, I don't know if you want to speak a bit more about that, but I just want to acknowledge that these questions are here.
Yes, and I really understand where those questions are coming from. You're here. So that means that you are very proactive about your health. You are looking for explanations, understandings, and answers. And I really commend you for that because it takes courage to do that. That being said, I have a professional and legal responsibility where I cannot give personalized consultation or recommendations to individuals who are not my patients. And I think you can understand that, how that would not be ethically appropriate, because with the kind of work that I do, I need the whole story to understand. So you might be sharing, for example, a glucose level or a stage of endometriosis, but I have no idea of anything else about you. And because the type of medicine that I practice isn't just symptom management, here's your prescription for metformin and off you go, I need to understand those other parameters. The intake forms for my new patients are 10 pages long. The initial consultation with my patients is 60 minutes. So that is just about data collecting so that at the end of those 60 minutes, I share with my patients, all right, this is what I think is going on. These are where I see the imbalances, and these are the steps on how I suggest proceeding with either testing, assessing, trial and error, or just jumping in whole hog. So I I thank you for your courage, for wanting to get answers and sharing your stories. But like Tara said, we can't address any of those that are very specific.
Thank you. There's an interesting question here, and I think it might relate to many women. I am postmenopausal. I would like to find natural ways helping with mood,
Yep.
sadness, anxiety, irritability.
Yep.
I've tried estrogen and a form of estrogen. None
Hmm.
of them helped. How can I support myself?
So the Hormone replacement therapy is a whole conversation and super personalized, but something to keep in mind just based on what you mentioned. What's really important is that if you want to try hormones, you've got to do it with a very hormone literate doctor who knows about how to personalize bioidentical hormones. A lot of that mood stuff, especially the progesterone, especially the anxiety, is going to be a high need for progesterone. And so this is applicable. I think we get a lot of these questions on what hormones should I take? In my humble opinion, you will be able to identify a hormone literate doctor when they will send you for blood tests before they prescribe hormones. That includes progesterone, estradiol, the three types of testosterone, cortisol, and the ones up here, LH and FSH. They need to have that baseline to then be able to make prescription recommendations for progesterone and estradiol usually. Then maybe they'll come in with testosterone, but that's apart. And then repeat the blood work about 8 to 10 to 12 weeks later to follow up with you in terms of symptoms, but to also check the numbers. Because what often happens is that most docs don't do any baseline testing, say to their patients, there's no point because your hormones are fluctuating all the time. Here are just standard doses. This is what everybody needs, and I'll see you in 6 months. These are all red flags that this might not be the practitioner for you. Okay. So that's on that front. So maybe you didn't get the right support out of the gate with hormone replacement therapy. Otherwise, in terms of plants or vitamins or minerals, what really jumped out at me would be to consider things like high dose fish oils. Omega-3, EPA, DHA fish oils are evidence-based for depression and all the dryness that comes with menopause, right? The skin, the eyes, the vagina, it's super fun. So high-dose fish oils, where you're taking 3 to 4 grams a day with a lot of EPA, that can be an option. I'm a big fan of vitamin E. You want to get a vitamin E that's got all the different types in it, 400 to 800 international units. If you're still having hot flashes, joint pain, that kind of a thing. For the mood part, magnesium often does wonders for anxiety. And if not, you can consider things like lavender, not in an essential oil that you smell, but actually concentrated in a capsule. Saffron and lavender are supplements that you can get from a health food store. You need to double check if you're taking any pharmaceutical drugs, but for the most part, they don't interact with pharmaceuticals versus something like St. John's wort, which can be an awesome mood, menopause, postmenopause support. But if you're on any pharmaceutical drugs, you need to have those contraindications checked. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Paula.
Okay.
Do you mind sharing again the name of the yoga nidra teacher?
Yeah, for sure. Allie,Ally, Booth, like a phone booth, Royd, Royd. I plan on meeting her someday. She's in the Kawartha Lakes. It's really close to where I do a lot of my spirit journeying and stuff. And she's just awesome. And there's just so much free on YouTube. Or if you don't want to be shocked out of your beautiful state by YouTube ads, then you can just download some of them from her website. They're super cheap. It's like a few bucks.
Ali Booth Roy.
Yeah, Royd with a D at the end. Yeah.
Amazing. If Emma or Mel, if one of you can write it in the chat, that would be lovely. Thank you. There's an interesting question here. Why does my melatonin kick in at 5 p.m.? And I'm assuming this person might be saying, why do I feel sleepy around 3 or 5 p.m.? I'm literally ready to sleep at that time, and then I'm dragging myself and have no energy for the rest
Yeah.
of the evening. And I think this is something that is quite common, where
Yes.
we have that energy slump in the afternoon.
Yes. The first thing I have to say is coffee. If you are drinking coffee within the first 90 minutes of waking, you can pretty much set your clock to about, depending on how early you have that coffee, anywhere from 1:30 to 3:30 of crashing. So if this is applicable to you, have a listen. What happens is when you wake up in the morning, you have a certain molecule, sleepy molecule in your brain that's called adenosine. And that adenosine, right, remember the musical chairs, is a molecule that's sitting in that receptor site that's communicating to your body it's sleepy time. And when you get up, that communication is still happening. And it takes about an hour and a half for that adenosine to come off of the chair. So for you to stop having that messaging in your body. Here's the catch. If you have a coffee before that adenosine has left the building, you are going to hold it in place. So you're going to have caffeine and adenosine going on, but the caffeine's stronger. So you're going to feel caffeinated. You're ready to go. But what happens is caffeine over the course of the day wears off. But your adenosine is still there because you didn't give it a chance to leave the receptor site because you blocked it. You've locked it in there with coffee. So you wake up in the morning, you've got a lot of adenosine. You have that coffee, you get caffeine. The caffeine's higher than the adenosine, so it takes over. But over the course of the day, that caffeine slowly chips away. And then in the afternoon, you're left with no more caffeine. And now I just have adenosine. So now I feel really tired and slumpy. So if that fits you, try having your morning coffee 90 minutes after waking. I know that can be hard. What I do with patients is I give them a list of warm, yummy coffee type of alternatives. So whether it's like a mushroom blend, a chicory inulin blend, a turmeric ginger chai kind of thing, but non-caffeinated, then that can be your morning warm drink replacement. And you can make it with a warmed plant-based milk, and then you have your coffee later. One possibility. The other possibility, if you're crashing it around that 2, 3 o'clock, and what I talked about with the coffee does not apply to you, chances are it's your adrenal glands that are exhausted and your cortisol is crashing. And that's where meditation, restorative yoga, adaptogens, hitting that high protein, including the morning, becomes really important. So try within your first hour or two of waking, having 30 grams of protein, which can come in the form of just a protein powder and water, and then making sure that at lunch you're getting another 25 to 30 grams of protein. See what happens. And if that doesn't work, then maybe you're in need of some adaptogen B vitamin support.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Paula.
You're welcome.
Another question here. What is your opinion on hormone therapy? Who is the best person to discuss this with and
Yeah.
understand what levels are normal, etc.?
So I kind of touched upon that a couple of questions ago, so I'm a big fan of hormone replacement therapy. What I think has been happening to women since what's called the Women's Health Initiative study, the WHI study. I'm going to say it. I think it's criminal. We've got 30% of the female population around the globe who is in perimenopause, menopausal disarray. That is a lot of people. And for there to be such a lack of education in our conventional medical system on how to understand and support these 35% of the world's population is completely unacceptable. So that being said, hormone replacement therapy isn't for everyone. There are red flags. Estrogen-dependent cancers, cardiovascular disease, blood clots, all of that. So it's not for everyone, but the vast majority of women can be candidates. And so I mentioned before those kind of big red flags of, if your doctor doesn't do baseline tests, if they give you standard doses, if they say, okay, I'll see you in 6 months, these are all big red flags that you may not be working with a practitioner who is educated in how to apply hormone replacement therapy for women. We definitely want to use bioidentical over synthetic. So I hope that helps. There's no repertory. Naturopathic doctors, we're trained to do this. I do this with patients, but there's no repertory of hormone literate doctors that I know.
Thank you, Paula. How do you know when you are done with menopause?
Interesting question. So no period for a year, you're in menopause. You go through that for another year or two, then you're like in postmenopause. What does it mean you're done with menopause? Like menopause is when your ovaries go to sleep, right? And so that kind of brisk hormonal change will give a lot of symptoms like hot flashes, night sweats, brain fog, anxiety, joint pain, vaginal dryness. And so when some of those symptoms seem to let up, which happens for some women, but not others, then you know you're kind of in that next chapter. A lot of women will need support for those symptoms. And so then maybe, a couple of years out, they'll try stopping those hormones or those supplements and see if those symptoms are still at bay. And that can help to indicate that, yep, you're over that hump and now you're in the long haul of beautiful longevity.
Amazing. Thank you. There's a few comments around endometriosis.
Mm,
So are there any
yeah.
lifestyle changes? Any general life, it's quite a general question, but are there any general
Yeah.
lifestyle changes that can help with endometriosis?
Endometriosis is so complex.
Mm.
And I think that complexity, you guys know what Venn diagrams are? Intersecting circles. So you've got a bunch of circles and they all intersect, and there's one point in the middle where they all touch. That point in the middle is going to be endometriosis. And then all these concentric circles are all the different aspects that can cause or contribute to the endometriosis. I don't believe that it's a one cause, one effect. I really believe it's a complex condition that includes gut microbiome disruption. So the bugs in the gut being out of balance, significant estrogen dominance. Why is that estrogen dominance there? Do you have a high toxin load from, let's say, mold toxicity, right? So for all you know, you could have gone to a daycare or grown up in a house where just behind the wall there was a ton of mold and you had no idea. Massive endocrine disruptor. All the plastics, do you live near pesticides, glyphosate, that kind of stuff? So a lot of the times I'll test environment toxin levels. We'll look at, is your liver able to detoxify properly? And I think that what's a big part with endometriosis is really looking at first and second chakra trauma and the energetic flow that's going on there. And so whether that's through hypnosis, psychedelics, Reiki, whatever other kind of energy work, neurofeedback, I would really encourage that. A lot of those tools will help with the pain management. I say that with such reverence to the amount of pain that women with endometriosis go through. So, in terms of your day to day, what Tara put together, that beautiful checklist on toxin loads, would be really important. So, I would really prioritize trying to get as many of those day to day toxins out. Even working with on a dietary front, getting out the dairy, getting out the gluten, getting out those high inflammatory foods, really focusing on plant-based, clean, high protein, tons of cruciferous vegetables that are cooked. These are all things that can be helpful. And whatever kind of Tai Chi, yoga, gentle Qigong would actually be a top of the list. Gentle, energetic movements to bring flow into the pelvis and with the liver would be some great top suggestions to start.
Amazing. Lots of great suggestions. Thank you, Paula.
You're welcome.
A few questions about tofu
Mm-hmm.
and the perhaps
Bad press.
the bad press, the bad rep that tofu has received.
Yeah, this is the way I see it. So, years ago, when soy got all the bad press, my understanding was that that largely came from a study that took out didazein and genistein, which are two phytoestrogenic compounds in soy, took those molecules out, put them in really high concentrations in a supplement, and then saw what happened. And then the freak out was, oh my goodness, these are estrogenic and they can be contributing to estrogen dominant cancers and health conditions. So then, screaming from the rooftops, soy is evil, stop soy. That's not how we eat soy. We're not, if you're eating tofu tempeh or edamame, and I'll come back to why I'm highlighting those three, or soy nuts or really clean soy milk, you're not remotely getting those incredibly high levels of those two compounds, didazein and genistein. You're getting a food source along with all the other compounds. And so when you look at the China study, which was looking at the advantages and massive decrease in cancer rates of a plant-based diet, tofu was the main source of protein. And so what you see in Southeastern cultures, Far Eastern cultures, is that there is a correlation between regular soy, clean soy intake and significantly decreased incidence of things like estrogenic breast cancers. There's going to be other factors in there as well, but those other factors are kind of getting cut out as the Western type of world and toxin loads are very present around the globe. So I think soy is a cool thing to eat. I don't have concern over it. I would limit it to max once a day, and I would focus on clean soy. Organic tofu, edamame, tempeh. The tempeh's got the fermentation, so for a lot of people, it's more tolerated. Clean soy milk and soy nuts. I would definitely stay clear of all transformed soy-based foods like soy hot dogs or puddings. Just read the ingredients listing. If it's other than, soy and a couple of other things, then it might not be the right way to go.
I also want to mention that soy milk, there's a lot of bad soy milk out there. And
Lots.
often when we go to a coffee shop and we take the soy milk alternative, they usually
Hmm.
don't use the good soy milk. So again, you want to make sure to check the ingredients of soy milk. You want to make sure that it has a maximum of 2 or 3 ingredients and it's organic soy as well. And the second
Exactly.
ingredient, you want it to be water,
Yeah,
and not anything that you can't read or understand as well.
exactly.
It's a great way to know.
Yeah.
I think we can do maybe one more question.
Okay.
What type of foods or supplement can I take to help improve brain fog, memory issues, and
Mm,
concentration?
okay. So I don't want to sound like a broken record, but after 21 years of practice, it is the best recommendation. Get your protein, right? 20 to 30 grams of protein 3 times a day, and you might need one. If you're like an intermittent faster, it may not be working for you. You might need that protein hit at 9, 9:30, 10 o'clock. So the protein is going to be really key. So when I've got something that's called Paula's Plate Portions, it's a webinar I did. You can find it on my website. It's like $5. It's really cheap, but it's basically the low carb Mediterranean diet, but made the Paula version. And what you see there in my plate, and we talked about this in our first talk last week, is half of your plate is cooked, and this is at least twice a day, are cooked veggies from the green leafy stuff. All right. So carrots, mushrooms, peppers, you want to eat those fine, but that doesn't count. We're talking broccoli, kale, rapini, dandelion, Swiss chard, asparagus, all of that stuff. Then you've got your 20 to 30 grams of protein. You've got a healthy fat, a little bit of avocado, a couple of nuts, a couple of olives, whatever works for you. Well, once you fill up all of that on your plate, you're going to be left with a very small portion for carbs. Have your carbs. Do the complex kind of either, quinoa, kamut pasta, squash, but you're not leaving a lot of room for you to start yo-yoing in your blood sugar levels. And when you yo-yo down, whoop, you get the brain fog, the crash, the can't concentrate. So that's on the dietary piece. You need to exercise because you need to get the circulation of the blood, which carries the oxygen up into your brain so you can keep using it. So when I'm feeling like I'm just a supercharged day of patience and I'm getting to a point in the day where I'm like, okay, I can't even see clearly anymore, I will literally do 50 jumping jacks. And that is just to get the blood flowing so that I can kind of get my brain back on track. And often that will help. In terms of supplements, I really like bacopa, beautiful plant, lion's mane, beautiful mushroom, really high dose fish oils. Those are three that you can generally quite safely give a try to.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Paula.
You're welcome.
I think we'll leave it at that.
Okay.
I want to thank you so much, Paula, for all the time,
You.
energy, effort you put into creating this workshop with me. And thank you all here, everyone who's here, who has joined, who has taken time out of their busy schedule to learn more about women's health. We really hope that this session was insightful and helpful for you. We will be sending out an email with a recap and the recording of today's session, as well as a survey that I would love for you to fill out to let us know how we did, what you liked, what you would like to see more of, so that we can keep on improving these workshops and webinars for you. And I think that's it. Any last words, Paula, before we wrap it up?
I just wanted to say that it was an absolute honor to work on this project, Tara. You're absolutely lovely, and what you bring to the platform with your presence, with your ability to communicate complex information in really tangible, down to earth ways, I think is just such a gift. And I honor and give great thanks to all of you who are proactive and looking for ways to enjoy the best versions of yourselves. And there's so much that you have in you, and may that path be wide open for you to connect with as much of it as possible. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Paula. Thank you so much, everyone. We hope to see you in the platform and in our future webinars. Thank you, everyone.
Good night.